All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and we have a couple very special guests. Our most returning and frequent guest, Jimbob. Thank you so much, sir, for coming back. And we have, how would you describe your guys' relationship? Batman and Robin, Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee. What exactly is it? We have Posh Redneck. Some of you guys are going to be familiar with our Serbian Orthodox brother and his great performance in the debate on evolution. But welcome, Posh. How are you today?
Thank you. I would describe it as Saruman and Gandalf.
Saruman and Gandalf. There you go.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm more Hobbit-like. So, but it's definitely not Batman and Robin.
Well, guys, I appreciate it. And Jimbob, thanks. I know you normally stream at this time. I really appreciate you coming on and having a conversation. I asked you guys to come on and talk about like paradigmatic thinking. And this is something Jimbob and we've gone back privately for a while. I'd say probably a couple years now in regards to ideas concerning this. And I know, Posh, you are also pretty familiar with the transcendental argument for God and sort of looking at worldviews. And so maybe where do we want to start this conversation?
Why don't you just for the audience, just in a really simple way, define a paradigm for everyone?
So a paradigm, as you've heard me reiterate so many other times, is basically what's considered a web of associations. This was a reference by Quine, is that there's sort of webs of belief, semiotic webs, that a paradigm has grown in academic thought in regards to everybody's in these own presuppositional webs of beliefs regarding their metaphysics, their epistemology, and their ethics or morality, how you want to frame that. And so, therefore, the academic enterprise that everybody thought they've been pursuing knowledge has fallen apart. And now relativism, postmodern turn, is basically now it's just everybody's in these own webs of beliefs. And so a lot of people don't realize that. And I know that your comedy is really influenced by looking at these sort of presuppositions. And it's sort of it's so subtle, but it's almost like a superpower. Like once you get normalized to looking at paradigms and worldviews, you can't help but see them all the time. But other people, they don't see it at all. So maybe both of you guys can kind of get into how you've developed or got interested into, again, paradigmatic thinking and how you would describe it and how it's going to influence your own worldviews.
I would start with maybe when I first got exposed to Jay Dyer and his stuff. I was amazed and also relieved that once you see things through that way of categorizing, you realize, well, for one, there's not that many starting points, which is great because that means there's not that many conclusions. Like there's not many. The start and the end of the road don't vary that much given what your starting points are. It always leads to some place, and so that's relieving, and it helps with my work because when I look at something, I want to say something, whether it's topical or more philosophically based. I'm always kind of looking at it through that framework of what is this person saying something, but really what I'm showing is what they must believe to even say that. Right. And so I always talk about it in my stream that don't be surprised when people say things, maybe hold back a second and don't respond to the direct particular thing about what they're saying, but look at what they might be assuming, what they must assume for them to even say such a thing. It's not always there or clear, but it actually helps a lot. Like you said before we started, our recent debate with JF and Richard Spencer is that, you talk past each other, but almost like that's the point. And the only way to unite that is to argue within the other person's paradigm or have them argue in yours. So what Posh and I did, and I think this is maybe the best way to debate, is that you basically jump into theirs and you just push them to every possible corner you can find, so that you're speaking the same language within the same assumptions, and you're actually granting them almost everything.
Right.
And then, it's not only helpful for writing, whether it's comedy or whatnot, or creativity. in general, but it's definitely useful for debates.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive in a little bit into your guys' debate. Posh, you want to say anything about, like, how did you get interested in sort of paradigmatic thinking? Because I know you've mentioned the tag argument, so you're very familiar.
Right. Well, the way I got into it was sort of by accident, by virtue of me studying languages. You know, I'm not a native English speaker. And when I started learning English, and English is a very specific language because it's so omnipresent, right, in all forms of culture, you know, film, video games, music, etc. And it got me thinking, like, how is it that I'm expressing this? Like, Serbian doesn't have articles. So what is this thing that I'm supposed to be learning to use, which doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned? And then English doesn't have grammatical cases. So how is that supposed to work? How does this fit here, this there? And then studying other languages, that gets expanded, and you start learning how they work, how you communicate,
Right.
how you get information across. And only later did that factor into realizing how deep that actually goes. And the rest is specifics.
Yeah, and that's a great point, though, that's kind of what now people, but general high intellectual thought believe, is that it's all these sort of linguistic webs of association. And so that's so funny that you learned sort of witnessing how these worldviews are parallel or tangential to each other through the use of words and, again, the presuppositional framework. And that's what's interesting, too. Then you start thinking about, like, pre-literate people and how they saw nature communicate to them, which is what something I've talked about, is that there's multiple theories. Like, there's Native American peoples in Alaska that the way they speak, like the way you hear their language sounds like birds singing, because their tribe venerates this particular bird, and they believe that when they hear that bird sing, it's their language, and they hear it, and it speaks to them. And so then as we move into the word, which is a sort of higher level order, that is a sort of paradigm shift in itself, is being able to read and then go into these higher level concepts, because, obviously pre-literate people didn't have them. But wherever you guys want to go, but I wanted to dive into your guys' debate, because part of this paradigm thinking, and Jimbob, you mentioned it, you can kind of go down, there's two ways. You either go into their paradigm, or you force people to step out of their paradigm and play into our game, which is looking at paradigms. Mm-hmm. So you guys did a really good job of both using their paradigm to look at. And one of the things that they could not process, that I try to super chat and point to, is you're talking about multiple chambered hearts. You're talking about the evolutionary process from a 2-chambered to a 4-chambered. And what they couldn't understand, they pointed like a turtle with like a 3.5 or something chambered heart. But the point was, from a 2 chambers to go to 3 chambers, there has to be an evolutionary process of tissues moving, changing, and that in between those states of the finished product, it would not be evolutionary beneficial, which then would go against natural selection, that every generation of life is becoming fitter and fitter. This would insinuate it's becoming unfit, more fit, and now it has a 3-chamber heart. Well, that defies the logic of that worldview, and they could not process that.
No, and they also just assumed that if you can point to some, like in this case, the turtle, the state of affairs of its heart, suddenly it assumes that it's halfway to something, right? They just they fundamentally didn't understand that they're still just begging the question of like, well, it's halfway there, right? And we're like, halfway where? It could be halfway away from where you want to go. You don't even know, because you don't even know where you are in this process. That's what I think was kind of revealed, is that JF had to concede that even the term species is just a temporary label for a time period.
Exactly.
Really, there's no real
distinction.
Species becomes gender, basically, and so they had that, and then this concept of disadvantage. Well, as soon as you point to a disadvantage, that's just a short-term period in which the organism responds to the disadvantage. So a disadvantage is just a prompt for an advantage, and so there's never. Everything must be evolution, like as Posh pointed out early in the debate. It's a must be, and it can't not be. It's similar to, I mean, this might be a stretch, but when we look at like miracles, right? You know, the definition of miracle itself couldn't actually be accounted for from a naturalistic, empirical way of paradigm.
Right.
And so it's not that a miracle exists and it's just not explained yet. It would have to actually exist outside of the thing they make sense of the world with.
Right.
It would have to suspend those things. And so, you know, the point is that when you're asking about the truth of the matter of something, like the paradigm and what they're all assuming to start with is how they're going to process whether it's possible or not.
Right.
And that's why presupposition, you know, and tag arguments are so important, because no one's never not doing. There's
right.
never a time where we're not doing this. It's just that for the world of, let's say, debate, it's not fun for them. It's like not. Posh said, it's uncomfortable, because then you have to justify. You don't just get to step on a stage and battle it. The whole argument of paradigms is, how do you account for the stage? You know, you're in a boxing ring, right? And everyone's like, oh, I got the gloves and I got the stage in the arena. And you're like, no. Our argument is, how does your worldview account for the arena?
Yeah, the arena, the stage, and the rules.
Yeah. And they're like, what do you mean? By. And then they go to like axioms. They go like, well, it's no different than a football game. We just invented this battle called argumentation. Okay. Well, if it's just invented, what are we doing? Are we just acting out lines? Do we have any control over the things we say?
Right.
And so forth?
Posh, you want to say anything?
Yes, because
I got to ask you a quick question. Does that microphone work, and why is it flipped up? Are you using a different mic? I've always wondered when you have that headset on.
No, I'm not using this one. It's out of frame.
Okay, I've always wondered that.
No, it's the headphones are too much already. I'm now in a position where even if they broke, I'd have to buy the same ones.
Posh, if you lower that microphone down and get some just like some construction tape, you could tape your cigarette to your microphone.
Yes. The Irish way of doing it. So what Jimbob and I were trying to discuss when we were prepping for the debate, you know, is how granular do we want to go? Because we want to touch on a very low resolution all the way up to high resolution. Right. Which examples do we choose? So I thought the heart is a very obvious one.
Obvious one. The famous ones are the eyeballs and wings, right? Mm-hmm. Wings is like, how does an appendage that, say, goes from a leg, the transition from a leg to a wing is a detriment to the survival of that animal for multiple generations until they can fly?
And a lot of use of important energy. Like, it's a total energy
and
expenditure.
The telos. It doesn't make sense. This is another problem is the teleology is, why would an animal develop an appendage to potentially fly? Not that it could fly, that it potentially, like all the aerodynamics and the physics that'd be involved. Like, what? That doesn't even make...
They say it's just luck. Once you point out like this intent behind it, like, well, how does not just an individual organism, but this concept of like 40% of the population just randomly started growing wings for some reason by some random thing inside the body. Not only that, they grow the same kind of wings. So if it was truly random, you'd get a bunch of birds with like squarish wings
with arms in front.
Yeah, and the fact that it all like points to some sort of purpose that's useful. They go, no, it's just happened. It's lucky. You know, the random mutation happened in the population and they kind of kept it. And then it just so happens that the wings in ratio to their bone density and how much they weigh and the fact that air itself has a particular fluidity to it, right? And a mass that, you know, these kind of things are, you know, evolution in general can't account. It can't even account for the existence of air, right? And this is why, Posh, I wish they took the bait on like abiogenesis, because there's a whole plethora of things that must be true as a starting point, such that you can get to populations, which is where they really want to start, and they have to start, because you go, no, we're not talking about the beginning of all life. You know, we don't know that yet, but let's just give ourselves a huge world full of very diverse animals.
Right.
And you're like, wait, no, we can't just give you that, right? We can't just give you that. That's like, just give us logic, right?
Which is also
evolution
what they
uses
ask.
exactly ad hoc, take it freely.
Right.
There's another point to be made about wings. I can't remember the exact terminology, but you also have analogous things that have evolved irrespective of the process by which you would get, birds having wings. But you also have insects who have wings, and they've developed them completely by a completely different mechanism.
Right.
Right. So these are, I can't remember if they're called parallel structures or analogous structures.
And it doesn't make sense too. Like, so say the first, an insect or a bird, the first one that's attempting to fly can't fly and got eaten.
Mm-hmm.
So he failed, right? So those genes don't move on, but the claim is, no, it was beneficial, and somehow it went on to the next generation, and then 7 generations. Then he flapped and he stayed up for 30 seconds. It's like, what?
Yeah. And then there were tons of, and also while that's happening on the beautiful Serengeti or wherever, there's these very dizzy giraffes just kind of like, falling over. Be like, dude, what's in that water? You're like, okay, what has to have happened? And the same goes for like the process. Richard was like, well, how do you explain the whale also breathes air? And you're like, and Posh and I are like, yeah. And how do you possibly account for that? Other things don't do that. And I'm like, other things aren't whales. I mean, you assume the whale needs to be like the other things. And if it has one thing that's like that thing, it was that thing is insane. It's like that's a massive jump, right?
That's why I mentioned the watchmaker, right? You wouldn't ask the same question about a watch that you would ask about something apparently evolving. So you would say, there's some guy who makes watches made this. Yes, exactly. With the giraffes, we went high resolution, so the heart was in the middle, and I prepped things, but it didn't work out to get them into abiogenesis, which is where they completely fall apart. There is nothing they can do in that regard. They can't even get them, as I said, prebiotically relevant manner. They can't get the components even. So he starts talking about certain amino acids doing things like that. Okay, so even if that started, and it has been responded to, not to get into it here, but that doesn't really get you where you need to go to have a first protocell. And then he said it doesn't need to have a membrane like a lipid bilayer or anything.
And he wanted to assume that 5, 10, 15 amino acids could replicate. Right. Well, we did it in a lab. Well, that doesn't mean that the first, like, you just started with 5, 10, 15 and they could You're just, it's another, like, well, just grant me this miracle and then I'll move it from here.
It's all miraculous.
If you did the same thing that you're trying to defeat, what are you talking about?
Right. But they start with the end product. So we got here and we had to have got to this point by some mechanism or some manner, right? And we see, a wolf become a chihuahua, therefore, it's, and I also mentioned the foxes, right? You can get a desert fox, with larger ears. I can understand that.
Yeah,
those are very...
I can understand that.
Right.
Even with humans and living in different climates and melanin and all this different stuff.
Certain things help out. If people had in Northern Europe, if they had a lot of melanin, it would be completely disastrous for them.
It'd be detrimental.
Right. And if people didn't have enough melanin in Africa, that would also pose a problem. It would cause issues with the skin, and again, vitamin D would be a problem, etc. So you can see things. They are practical, but they are rather small compared to evolving entire body parts. And I couldn't get past that initial phase where I had to say, okay, but you need to also develop warm-bloodedness. How would you develop warm-bloodedness? You need entire mechanisms to deal with it, or with the far more intellectual debate I had with Brenda on Jimbob's channel. I mentioned the milk glands, right? You need an entire system of hormones to make sure milk is produced only when needed. And it is a very delicate system because it is incredibly taxing on the body to produce it. So first of all, how do you get to it?
Right. What was the first time? Why would it be an advantage at that time? Like was it a pimple? Was it like a milk pimple? And they were like, oh, we got to keep that going,
And why would the baby have the instinct to suckle on it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you get to that? That's information. You need that coded in. Yeah. So you could have, the glands. Let's grant it, but it still needs to be used in a proper manner, and they can't account for it. But it doesn't matter because, again, wolf to chihuahua, therefore milk glands.
Yeah, it points. I mean, it points to the paradigm, the lens through which they perceive and interpret what the information is doesn't even tell you whether the information they're interpreting is even correct or not. That's a whole other thing. That's why the paradigm is so important. Is that two paradigms perceiving the same information can run to different conclusions, or one could run to no conclusion and whatnot. And so one thing about Posh, when you said like the fox in the ears, one thing we distinguish is that all of these kinds of things, these like external visible things that can alter, it's still pre-coded though. It's not like it was just this magical thing and they responded and it was like, no, it was already in them to do this, right? And so this is where people make this jump where they're like, well, the beaks, got longer or sharper, so therefore then you're like, therefore what? Like all that says is that the organism as it is, right? In its wholeness has the capacity already to do this, not like, oh, I better mutate so this gets sharper. No, it's just like if you and I kept using our fingernails now, our fingernails would, in a form of getting callous, they would get stronger, right? But we're all dainty now and we use gloves and stuff, and so they're weak. But we wouldn't say like, because we use our fingernails, let's say we all lived in the woods again for like several years and we built up this callus and these stronger nails, we wouldn't just jump to that there was a mutation that happened and now we're capable of potentially growing very long bear-like claws and then suddenly changing our hunting behavior to match a bear or something like that.
Right.
And this is the jumps that people make,
right.
But their presupposition allows them to make jumps. Right. So that's why you attack at higher resolution, because you're in their paradigm. You're still in their paradigm, and you say, okay, how does your paradigm account for high resolution stuff? And really what we demonstrated, at least to us, of course we're biased, is that they couldn't account for the high resolution. They had to say, well, we imagined it could have happened and it must have happened this way. Yeah. And you're like, well, no, we're not talking about imagining stuff.
Right. Well, that's why I'm glad you point out the story and you lay that out in your opening monologue there, because then you framed the debate for people maybe who aren't as conscientious of this stuff, where they can just hear it and kind of like, wow, that guy's an idiot. But to hear then, okay, well, let me look for stories, and then everything turned into imagining and then a narrative description of what could have happened. And that's basically their worldview. And it's psychology and evolution has become the sort of epistemic basis of the contemporary world. And so everything then can be explained based on psychological and evolutionary reasonings and theories. And one of the things you guys didn't even get into is the statistical unprobability and how much longer the universe would have to, quote unquote, be in age compared to the 13.8 billion we're contemporarily told. And again, with paradigms, and we can go wherever you guys want to go after this, but the age of the universe, people would say, well, I don't understand how you guys can be creationists or believe in God when the universe is 13.8 billion years, assuming that we have to then count for the process of it becoming 13.8 billion from the get-go. And an obvious, again, paradigmatic difference. If God is God, God can create something that was already 13.8 billion years old in its perception of how we would measure the thing to begin with.
Right.
And so that's not even a problem. It's not even a criticism.
I think I mentioned the measuring the flow rate through a faucet. How you can get a bucket with a marked volume, right? And I said 10 liters, and then you turn the faucet to maximum, right? And then you see how long it takes for it to fill up to that point, and then you do the division, and you got to the flow rate. But you cannot account for someone coming in and taking water out or pouring more water in.
Right.
And that is an intelligent agent who does that. And if you rely in your paradigm that it is all just the faucet flowing undisturbed, etc., then I cannot, the paradigms are not compatible. Right. I don't know what to say. We believe in intelligent agents,
right,
which at the end I said they don't actually do. Because
no, they can't. Like you said, basically based on their view, which I got another shout out to Chase Haggard for the call in and just completely obliterating JF within 7 seconds, I think. And so he pointed out something so crucial, is that if they really do believe that all of reality is strictly just a mechanism, and then their argument for evolution is just one more mechanism that they as mechanisms are now arguing for, but not because it's true, but
and determined, right? And it's determined.
And they are determined to find truth statements. And so basically they're like, oh wow, you believe in creation, that's crazy. And you're like, you believe you were once a strawberry, and that somehow you're now a human, and that we're supposed to believe that you now have access to knowledge, right? And that the utterances coming out of your mouth aren't just symptoms of pure movement of parts, right? So this is why paradigms are so important, because you hold them to what they ultimately believe about reality, right? And it sounds inconsequential when you're talking about evolution, but it's really not, because everything, it's like a faucet. It's like all the water comes from that faucet, right? There's a certain amount or whatever it is, right? And so you just go, well, we're going to talk about this little structure we call a paradigm, and they're like, I don't want to talk about my faucet, I want to talk about the water. And you're like, no, it's all connected. You can't.
And that connection is they don't want to take it also to the end conclusions. And so that's part of the paradigms is that, you know, if you're going to get into it, and the problem is a lot of people don't think on this level, and so it's difficult to criticize somebody at this level of thought, because a lot of people don't think at that level. So it's like you're like telling somebody they're doing something wrong, they don't even know what they're doing, and it's really a pointless conversation. But like in your debate, for example, turned out they're against transhumanism. Well, you know, sorry about you, but again, your paradigm insinuates evolutionary progress, and the extension of man as a species is tied to his tools, and therefore the species itself is evolving in the technology, and the technology itself is considered basically us, and the fusing with us is the next evolutionary process. So your paradigm supports transhumanism, bro.
Which he admitted that I just asked him flat out, if we're nature and everything we do is nature, everything, there's nothing we can't do. There's nothing that we do that can't be evolution. Everything, including believing in God. And so that came up too, where they have to admit that belief in God is not only an evolutionary expression, but it's also an advantage. It's the better one. It's the better expression, right? And so he admitted that technology is considered evolution, yet he is a truth-seeking machine, and he knows that it's not a good idea. And you're like, well, you can't make truth claims because this process is way beyond your opinions, right?
Right.
About the truth.
If I may interject with some linguistics, this is where people use terms loosely, like natural. What is natural?
Right.
So there are people who are atheists and have a backlash against the LGBT thing, and but they can't really do it because they have no basis for morality.
Exactly.
So what do? They appeal to nature, and they say it's not natural. But you're an atheist. What is it? Supernatural? You know. So, and the fact that they like the leftists who go with this is anthropogenic, it's not natural, right? They try to make that distinct. Again, you can make distinctions between society, as in human society, and nature on the other hand. But actually, if we are natural, then anthropogenic is also natural, because humans are doing it and we are natural. So everything is a part of nature. And they go, we are destroying the earth. We're part of the earth. So
also
it's
natural.
like,
Yeah.
Also very natural, right? And people they don't want to. They want the conclusion, and the methodology is a nuisance.
Well, that's a great point. And, yeah, the methodology is a nuisance. Well, again, that's where this epistemology this is another part of these presuppositions, is people don't think about how they can come to know something, what that means to know something. And so epistemology is a huge then presupposition that a lot of people just have never dealt with in regards to thinking about that, the way that I interpret something. And even to them, they believe everything's interpretation. That's why, again, truth is broken down. But they tend to not think in, how do I come to know something and whatnot? So epistemology is a huge part that people just, and that's what was on display again, even in your debate, because even on their terms and their worldview, they can't make truth claims. So,
yeah, I don't know what. Yeah,
sorry.
I was gonna say I don't know where Richard went in his head when JF admitted and bit the bullet on that he's just a machine and he's a truth-seeking machine. And then we ask him, how does he know he's a truth-seeking machine? Is that he's a truth-seeking machine?
Right.
And so I don't know. I think Richard was like, hopefully he was like, wait a second, I might have to distance myself from this particular view.
Right, and they conceded to the evolutionary benefit of religion and having kids, and then ironically neither of them have kids. Both of them are atheists, and so again, according to their own paradigm and their own presuppositions, why would you adopt an evolutionary unbeneficial beginning point and worldview? If you're consistent with your own paradigm, then you would actually be religious, whether you totally believed in it or not, due to the utilitarian effects and the benefits of it.
This is where I believe they go into armchair psychology or psychologism, whatever they want to call it. Like people who say you believe in God because it's all, we're like in a car that's driving fast, but there's one of your parents is driving so you feel safe. Right, and this is what they do. They do the inverse, and they are the edgy teen. Right, well, I accept it even if I die. It's rubbish, but it's psychology is all they have.
It's all they have.
That's
what it
they can't justify it, but they have it. Apparently,
it reminds me of how like people like Elon Musk will be like Neuralink, we're gonna be one mind, all this stuff. And you probably get them in a corner. You're like, are you going to do it? When are you signing up? And they're like, no, they need me outside of the system to make commentary. Yeah. Like, so JF is like, well, I am the one who can make the predictions, but I am not, so you're not, you can't take on the actual pragmatic,
right? The actual worldview.
The worldview itself. It's like, you have to stay outside as a commentator. And so,
it's like Elon Musk saying he's not going to Mars, but he definitely wants to build rockets to send people to go to Mars. And I'd say that, again, it's a suicide mission. I don't even know if we can leave the Van Allen belt, but that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself.
No way.
So, maybe we can get into some of the presuppositions you guys have been dealing with and working through, because Jimbob, I feel like part of your journey and even your comedy is continually sort of working through your own personal development. And so that was, I think, the veganism and different worldviews. It seems like you move through months of like dealing with certain arguments and opponents, really looking at the presuppositions and the paradigms. I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. It's the things I'm interested in and looking at, and even if it ends up in me like trying to tear it apart, I want to look at what does this all like. Actually, what I look at is how does any given particular worldview account for knowledge and morality specifically, because that kind of really tells us where people stand, because morality then assumes some sort of telos towards something, that we ought to go towards something, but then ought to go towards something assumes that there's some absolute truth, and that purpose is in fact something that's steady across time. And so for any given, right now it's in a really I'm in the war zone of Gnosticism in general.
I
New
know
Age.
you've been really taking on. I've seen that latest.
And I think it's really a worthy task because it's rampant, and it's not only rampant, but it's rampant specifically in sort of like truther circles because it's very accessible and it doesn't require much of you insofar as how you live.
And I believe it's tangential to the truth and the moral structure that the truther movement moves from. So the truther movement, I think, is rooted in a sort of, I don't know, maybe a conservative Christian morality. But then the Gnosticism allows them to sort of, with their understanding, it's like, well, I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You know, you don't realize about these books. And it's basically just spiritual existentialism. And it's, again, moving them back to worshiping themselves, but they have 1 foot in the moral truth.
Right, exactly. And recently, you know, I brought up it was like a review that Jaron from Jaronism did of me. Someone asked a question about this general take on trying to critique the God of the Old Testament. And I just basically said run-of-the-mill, you know, commentary of like, well, you need a standard to judge God. And so, you know, there's no our morality versus God's morality. And then you compare and then you try to match your morality to God's morality. And there's no morality. This is another part where this New Age thing, the whole critique you did on Russell Brand has this assumption underneath it too, which is morality is like this fixed, the assumption is that morality is this fixed sort of metaphysical object that's distinct but related to God, like it's its own thing out there that God's subject to, as well as logic and reasoning.
God is subject,
right?
No,
and you're like, well, if God's true, he would be subject to logic and morality, and if he doesn't match that, and then you're like, what is that though? You can't just say God doesn't fit this morality and truth, then he's not God. And there's a truth to that, but the irony is that requires God.
Right.
The basis itself is not you. It can't be you. It's not. So I've heard people say it, like they actually say it with, like, actually say the words, my morality. Yeah. And I'm measuring my morality against God's, and that's how I'm going to do this, like, sort of like shopping. I'm going to do my shopping, you know, with the gods of Walmart, you know, in a theology aisle, whatever. Yeah. Not, you know.
No, that's perfect, because they're worshiping an abstraction, which is morality itself. So they move God, which, again, this is part of the Orthodox worldview, is that all these higher faculties actually can only be done on a one-to-one personal level. And I think that's really, again, part of a paradigm. If you kind of poke your head through a paradigm where you start to look at that actually only a person, which is in our worldview made in the image of God, can actually do what we would call love and truth and honor and logic and justice and morality. And you're like, wow, that's really beautiful. And that then is how we get it, is because then there's three persons in one essence. There's a God of which then we engage with on a personal level. And they then lose the personhood, the specific of God, and then they worship a sort of after effect, the fact that there's a moral, ethical structure. And so then they just worship the morality
and reason. And reason too.
Yeah.
Worship reason too. And you know, people get triggered when you say worship. They think like, well, I'm not bowing down to reason. I didn't do any bowing. I didn't do any. No, it's that your the ultimate basis for what is possible and not possible, what is true and not true, is only reason. All right. But at the same time, you could get any one of these people, you know, if they presuppose God and you give them their imagined infinite version, right? You could see, you know, Marty Leeds would be, God is, you know, 3.14, right? Or whatever.
Yeah. Another abstract.
Granted, right? And then you go, exactly, a consequence. And then you go, or a description, like in its wholeness, the whole description must fit our ability to reason and rationalize and use language. And, like, you know, we're clearly limited in our analogous form of communication. And yet they come to these absolute notions in full completeness of who God is, but who God is impersonal. So you know who God is, and you're like, who is God? And they're like, it's not like someone we could like really know. It's just creator umbrella. And you're like, okay, who's creator umbrella? And they're like, doesn't matter, just hold the umbrella, dude. And you're like, well, no, I want to know who God is. Right. And our desire is actually within that context of personhood. I mean, that's how we share all of each other's attributes, is through personhood. if there's any relationship between God and man, which seems, as to our best knowledge, man is peculiar to in his belief to God. There's no dogs, walking around arguing about Gnosticism.
Right.
Anyway, the whole concept is that they put logic. So it comes up with the Trinity too, like this process, which sounds rational when you're doing it, because you go, well, no, if God exists, he must be in some simple form so we get to know him, and I have to be able to use what he gave me to understand him in some way. And that's all sounds right. But then once you put a limitation on God, right, and say, well, no, he can't actually transcend my concept and use of logic, the way I use logic in the world to make sense of universal and particular things, the separation between the dresser and the drawers of the dresser. There's parts.
Right.
We can't help it. We try to, we abide by the law of identity and non-contradiction in the way we operate here, in the way we think.
It's necessary for survival itself if you want to use a sort of biological emphasis.
Right. So I'm sympathetic to the people who are kind of locked into that system, at least temporarily, but you have to understand that if you do presuppose God, it's still logical that God would transcend logic and reason. Right. So it's not logical for anything else, though. So it's that's where the paradigm matters.
This
is where, similar to circularity, people they sometimes call out circularity when it's not a problem, right?
Right.
And then they call out circularity when it is. And this is also a paradigm thing, right? It's a systems thing. It's you can call out a circularity in a system, but at some point, language, words mean themselves, right?
Right. Everything becomes circular at some point, which is sort of the perfecting of the circle. And then we can end, as we move into that, not yet, but the tag argument and how then God is that sort of ending of these perfect circles, of these sort of self-referential processes, which ultimately, if you're just going to move it back a step in regards to having to believe in something, it has to end with the capstone of that there is a God. And then it's just between which religion are you going to believe in?
Right. And then that's why if you're religious and into math, I knew a Catholic who was super into logic and math, and he was desperately trying to come up with some sort of logical system, an actual logic system that justified the Trinity. And you can't do it because, math and logic, they're not going to be consistent within themselves, and they're going to be incomplete because of the nature of what the meaning of the language is inside of those systems. So you're always going to be in a problem, and Kurt Gödel pointed that out in a way more, confusing, crazy way that only mathematicians understand. But generally speaking, you're always going to be appealing outside.
Right.
And so what's the only thing that you can't appeal outside of? Well, you wouldn't call God a system, but maybe, Peterson would call him a system, or people who are drawn to, propositional logic and mathematics might be tempted into try to categorize God as a system.
Right.
And God can't be a system.
Right. And I think, again, it moves back to this abstraction. I want to make a point. Guys, smash that like for everybody listening. Would really appreciate that. Is the personal God, is when you were speaking, something that popped in my mind was how with a personal God and then morality, that sort of, begin with a personal God, then morality. When you break that moral code, there's a sense of shame, there's a sense of accountability. And if you just worship the abstraction of morality or the universe itself, it sort of takes away the sting of actual transgressing moral structures. Because it's what is accountability? I am ultimately God here. And that's where they get into these monistic worldviews where good and bad necessitate each other's existence. And therefore, even if I do something bad, it's not that bad. It's just within existence.
Right. And also if everything's one and you are a part of God and God is one with you and all the world and everything in it, there's no away from God. It's just one, right? So there's no, how could oneness like this, a circle exist of oneness, and you're in that and you go, you could never make the distinction of going away from, because away from would be toward, because all is one. And these distinctions are really important when people start to push just general like universal things, like God is just a universal one and we're a part of God. And then you're like, well, who's talking? You know, like you get into really sharp, again, I'm glad the resolution term comes in, because you can always attack something in higher resolution,
right?
Or you could attack it from lower resolution, but it's kind of like that's the attack mode. It's like your knife can either go really deep in or out. And so,
right. And Posh, you feel free if there's anything you want to chime in here.
Right. I wanted to say people who presuppose that Unitarianism is just more logical, they usually come from Aristotle's, if not his exact thinking, then maybe something that is Aristotle-like and his chain of being and how you have composition, and then you have to go back up the chain, and ultimately you would find something that is absolutely simple with no composition at all, because if it has parts, then the parts precede the whole, etc., etc. But they don't conclude the following the logic, the things that Aristotle logically concludes. It's not a personal God, because he cannot be. And it's this type of perfection that sort of generates its opposites in all sorts of ways. But they don't do that. They just want to take the part where it's Unitarianism is just, it is obvious that it is more logical than the Trinity. Right? This is the thing. It's tactical engagement with a certain paradigm and not going through with it.
Right, right. And these paradigms, part of the Orthodox thing, and so we could get into a little bit more of the religion, is like, I think one of the easiest atheist criticisms is the Theodicy. It's a term to describe the how do you account for the existence of evil, you bigot? You worship a nice, good God, and there's nasty things, and my mom has cancer. Like, and Orthodoxy has a paradigm that, again, is unique in regards to the sort of spectrum of things. And you have to understand the sort of energies and the uncreated energies, but we'll use truth here. If truth is a thing, like heat, the opposite of heat we call cold, but that's just a term used to describe the absence of thermodynamic energy. There's no energy, there's no heat, that's coldness. Well, that's what we would call falsehood. There's no energy of God. There's no truthful energy, and therefore it's just a term to describe what we would call something with negative existence. That is a paradigm shift in understanding how these dialectics or these dualisms or the yin and yang, how these things match up. And I don't believe there's any other worldview that I'm familiar with that has that sort of framework and understanding.
Well, that is very important because it goes into the good and evil necessitate each other.
Yes,
they're presented as
which forces
these opposites.
dualism, or forces
Right.
then actually there is no thing that's bad because they necessitate each other.
Right. If I feed this cat, I have to kick the other one. No, I can feed both. It's not difficult. I can also kick both, I suppose. But it is a ridiculous thing to say, because they have, as you said, even cold, with the way we use it, I'm feeling cold, right? I handle cold very well. The reason I'm in what you would call a wife beater is because I handle
multiple
heat
reasons
awfully. I still am indebted to Jimbob about dying on stream of heat. It has to be in his stream, so sorry. But I can't handle the heat well. But there are people who are the opposite, right? Heat is no problem. Cold is a massive problem.
Right.
So if you say I feel, then you can say it is about, and there is this how shall we say, spectrum in which humans can live.
Right.
Whether we supplement that with air conditioning or clothing, etc. But there's only so much we can handle, right? And that is where we believe in heat and cold as practical terms. But in essence, there is no such thing as cold.
Right.
There's only absolute zero, right?
But you see what you did there is you used philosophical categories of essence, nature, and substance. And I wrote this down earlier, and I didn't want to call it back because we kind of moved on. But one of the things I wanted to point, and it even went back to your guys's debate with the naturalist there, is their essences and the maintaining of categories across, because apparently they don't believe in essences based on their own description of species, but at the same time they do believe in essences the way they describe the world at other points. And again, this gets back to this sort of paradigmatic thinking. Well, how do you account for things being universal? And can you make universal claims? Well, they've chose a paradigm that they can't make universal claims outside the necessity of natural selection and an evolutionary mechanics. That's what they've signed up for. And yet they're also making universal claims in the fact that they're in a debate to begin with, again.
Right. Or if you just ask them, when people deny universals, I ask them, imagine a circle. And then if they do, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you just, like, what is that? And you're like,
maybe they do the SpongeBob thing. How do you draw a circle? He draws an entire head like perfectly, and then starts erasing things. And ends up with this.
That's hilarious.
One thing I want to mention with this, like, sort of like balanced thing of like good and evil, right? Is that not only is that false because of what you said, like it's hot in the absence of heat, and it's light in the absence of light. It's not one. You can't. It's like people might say like you can't have one without the other. No, the other is just the absence of the one, and so it's not like this equal two parts mixed to like some pancake batter. And the other thing is when we look at the good and the privation of good, the ratio is not even close to 50-50, right? The way we experience life and each other in the world.
Right.
It's, I wouldn't be confident in putting an actual number, but it's so disproportionate in my view, even across cultures with even, in my view, incoherent religions, right? That there's still a maintenance of a disproportionate good
True. Right.
to what generally people would call bad, even utilitarians who just kind of try to make the bad preference or anything. Like in any model of morality, even the broken ones, it's never this equal parts.
Right.
It's never equal.
I totally agree. And again, in regards to paradigms, another one that we both have spoken about, I know Jimbob and I'm sure Posh is aware, is perennialism. Well, then it's the idea that all these different traditions are leading to the same point. Well, that's a presuppositional paradigm that totally is self-contradictory and has, and then you ask, well, based on what epistemological framework are you using to make the claim that atheistic Zen Buddhism and theistic Christianity with the Trinity and Neoplatonism and Nordic paganism, it's all leading to the same mountaintop when they're fundamental. Again, the paradigms are different. And so orthodoxy as a paradigm has logos spermaticos, which can make sense of the fact that truth can be present in the multiplicity of places, whereas perennialism itself has no single epistemology. But you would only see that if you're thinking at the paradigmatic level, which is the problem, is people don't think that way. And so it's natural. If you were just a normie, it would make sense. Well, all religions kind of have equal truth. I mean, you can kind of think why people would say that and believe that.
Yeah, it's tempting. Then again, that brings in what their responsibility in the world is. It's like, if all religions are kind of generally equally true, then you don't have any real responsibility or duty to warn people about false truths or correct people or get in confrontation about theology and all this stuff. And I can see that. And it also, let's face it, for some people, it's a way to just protect their sinful nature. And that's why they go into, well, at least it's not hurting someone. When someone says it, as long as it doesn't hurt someone, all I think of is all of the things they might be doing in the dark, where I'm like, you can't hold tight to that. Sorry, I don't want to go on a tangent to like libertarianism. Casimir's
well, you
show
can.
up.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, that general view, I think libertarianism would be a consequence, not an actual worldview.
And it assumes unified morality and ethics, which is the only way that thing can even remotely make somewhat sense. Is that, well, if we're all homogenous in our racial makeup and our moral makeup and our religious makeup that found our presuppositions, well, then somewhat of a let your neighbor be will work itself out due to the traditionality of the tradition within the society itself. But the way that it is in the post-enlightenment, where we do away with God and it's just reason, and you can kind of do whatever you want, and then if what those guys do in their bedroom doesn't affect you. Well, it does, because they're doing it now on the street at a pride festival, and it does affect me, and it affects culture. And the idea that what we do privately doesn't affect the world or culture itself, that's a weird idea itself. It's almost a secular idea of a compartmentalization, which is what we do with religion, right? That somehow we can all participate in the American experiment, but we leave our orthodoxy at home when we go and we participate in the public. That's like kind of the same idea as like, well, you just compartmentalize your sexual preferences and how you like to display that publicly at home, and then you're just part of, you're just a number, you're just a social security number then, and you can participate in democracy.
Yeah, democracy, or like the free market, or like some right-leaning, ideal of an economic system. This is where you get all the Tapusa and PragerUs showing up and celebrating Dave and Dave having their the baby that they can't have, and you start to see, well, okay, that view has nothing to do with morality anymore. It's just like this political war of like, what kind of culture do we want, but not given by a higher order of things, right? This is kind of what Breitbart sold us, and at the time he sold me too, because it sounded so good that politics is downstream from culture. But he never asked the question, what culture is downstream from? Again, the paradigms are important to look at, because you can't just assume culture is established and it's just a given. What is it informed by? What views is it informed by? Obviously, there's going to be a moral claim right there the moment someone says we should really, whatever, insert anything. We should, we should. The moment they say it, you go, okay,
once they have
give me the rest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing why I think libertarianism and whatever form of liberalism happens to crawl out of the ninth pit of hell is the fact that they can't really contain anything, because why I think it was so useful for the elites to promote that as a precursor to where we are now is that they laid the groundworks for liberals to destroy a conservative idea, and conservatives saying porn should be banned, and no homosexuality and whatever. But let's stick with porn, right? So it was like, why are you destroying my God-given right to watch porn, right?
Oh my God!
Right, it's
to defile myself. Yeah.
Right, it's banning porn is just one step from the gulags, and right. So the elites are like, oh no, we are so afraid of you, free speech extremists, and then they go and push it and push it and push it,
right.
And the elites are like, oh no, here's cuties.
Yeah, exactly. And then Ben Shapiro's like, it wasn't that bad. You had a pretty good message.
Yeah, exactly. My wife's a doctor.
I watched it like 3 times, and it was like, at first time I was like, oh, this is disgusting. Then it kind of grew on me. It was like,
right. But the problem is that, oh no, it's not that is child porn. And the same question the conservatives were asked. Okay, define porn. And the only thing you can say is like, I know it when I see it. Right.
That's
and then they say, oh, but we can see that this is child porn. Okay, why? Because they're twerking.
Yeah.
So
no,
who says
what was that movie called? Sweeties or Cuties or something?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Like literally 10, 12-year-old girls twerking for grown people. I mean,
but when in their paradigm, it's about do you call the government in and impose something upon those people? And then when they say, oh, twerking, but you need to define how twerking is sexual. Do you find it sexual? What
what's wrong with what man sexually molested you?
Right. The same thing. Do you guys remember that old response to being against homosexuality was, I don't know of anything more gay than worrying about what other men do with their penises. Right?
Yeah, it's a good twist of rhetoric, right?
Exactly. It's a masterful and dark piece of rhetoric.
Yes. Rhetorical genius right there.
But then they have it flipped on them, right? And they can't do anything about it because they've destroyed the entire mechanism. Liberalism and libertarianism rely parasitically on the fact that certain questions are never asked.
Right.
And then the progressives come in and ask them, and they haven't got a response because they don't have a framework of morality except for you can't hurt people, and then they lose when the progressives come in and why is this hurting? Aren't you hurting me by banning this, etc.?
Right, exactly. You're banning your libertarian ethos of again, because they have no morality. Liberty itself, again, the abstraction of liberty itself is a good in and of itself, which again is just, it makes no sense because there's no ordered structure. Liberty without constraint is just chaos, and that's kind of what it is. Libertarianism has turned into a sort of anarchy, presuppositional paradigm to some degree.
But this is the thing. I'm working on a concept called classical liberalism, the double hypocrisy, because I believe classical liberalism is a hypocritical form of libertarianism, and libertarianism is a hypocritical form of anarcho-capitalism. Because, they will say taxation is literal rape. And then you say, okay, but you're a libertarian, you're not an anarcho-capitalist, so what? You want just a bit of tax? It's not rape, it's sexual harassment.
Right. So just grab on the train.
Groping,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, great point. Some of the other paradigms that you guys have been dealing with, I mean, evolution, atheism. Again, you kind of dealt with veganism. What's kind of your thoughts or what your experience is, Jimbob, with like vegan presuppositions? I mean, it's really, again, back to the morality, and then they then fix themselves on objective moral claims in regards to you bigot, you eat animals, don't you realize? And so it's like they have a strange their presupposition like diminishes our anthropology to make us equal to animals, elevates animals to like sacred objects that can't be eaten, and then
elevates, but that at the same time elevates themselves, talking down at both of those. So it's like, here's a human, you even them out, and then you raise the animal to in some context above the human. But the speaker, the arguer, again, this is interesting how they pull themselves out of the systems they're arguing to look down as if they're like these very important journalists of the times no, I have to stay above and look down. And it all, the veganism especially relies wholly on violating the law of identity between man and animal. And you couldn't argue unless the two remained distinct, right? So you can't argue unless they're distinct. If they were equal, why on earth would you be arguing on behalf of the animal who's equal value to you? It needs to figure out its own system of language, right? And argue, well, it can't. Okay, why can't it? What's different about us? Right?
Exactly.
It doesn't or it can't. And then you go, okay, so then it gets into they're making judgment and value claims about things that can't do what we do, right? But to do that is like a kind of a performative contradiction because you're actually actively performing as higher than the animal. So I at least not respect. I at least acknowledge some of the vegans who take on consistently that they are above animals, and from there it's their duty to stop them from being eaten. At least is a better start than we're equal or that we deserve the same X, whatever, right? They go to rights, which can be demolished quickly. So yeah, I think it ultimately goes to a paradigm that keeps that tries to maintain, like you said, and either the animal elevates, they're better than us. They don't do all these. Yeah, they do. They do worse. Or we're equal just because they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to.
And either way, they're making ethical claims, insinuating that we are different from the animals to some. So it's just really we're schism or sort of schizophrenia where it's like we're animals. I can't believe you would also eat animals. That's the same thing as cannibalism. But at the
Right.
same time, then I'm making an ethical claim which separates me from the animal kingdom, and why we don't do that. We don't participate what the lions and tigers do. And then so it's like this weird, like we're not animals, but we are animals. And then if you eat animals, you couldn't be more of an animal. Like, I can't believe you're an animal. Like, don't you want to be human? Stop eating animals.
Can you enable my screen share for a second?
Sure.
I have a perfect cartoon I always bring. I didn't make it, but it's
ahead.
hilarious. Let me see. Where do I just bring this in? Do I just drag it in? I've never used this whiteboard. Okay. Oh, never mind. It's too. I don't understand the system here. It says computer audio, portion of the screen, slides, virtual background, content from second camera.
It should be you click the share screen and then you can like window capture the thing that you want to show.
Oh, okay. Window. Okay.
It's kind of like a window capture thing where just click on the window of the thing you want to share.
Gotcha. Okay. Let me try again. Yeah, it's not showing up. Sorry, it's okay. It's a picture of a cow who's dressed like a farmer carrying a human baby away from the screaming mother who's like naked on all fours behind a fence, and you're like does the vegans think this is a good representation of what they're really arguing, and meanwhile they don't understand exactly what you just said, where all you're doing is just trying to equalize things, but also maintain they're completely separate.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like,
Which is it?
Weird. and they're doing that like it's so subtle because it's coming at you again. A paradigm. It's like it's both are coming at you at the same time that you really, I think a lot of people may not see exactly what we just said there. That they're bringing a separation from animals, but saying you are animals at the same time in the same argument within like just a couple sentences.
Just the thing. And there's a huge problem there because if they are moral agents, the animals, why don't we hold them accountable for killing other animals?
I'm going to kill them.
Right, but it's also there is only city folk are silly enough to believe that animals only kill as much as they need. Because superfluous killing is a very, very present phenomenon.
Yeah, especially for apex predators.
Even for a donkey.
For bloody weasels and ferrets and whatnot, when they get in a chicken coop, they just massacre everything they can. So why don't we hold them?
Cats house cats kill things just to play with them.
Right, but they might say it's for training. We're training for what? Killing more animals.
Training for
right. It's a huge problem because, again, there's that distinction, right? Because we are moral agents and we can be held accountable for killing animals because animals are moral agents, but we can't hold animals, which are moral agents, accountable for killing other animals, which are moral. I don't know. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
But also...
well, it's because you're a bigot using logic. That's white supremacy.
Oh, definitely. Us Eastern European bastards.
Also, what's the logical end of it? I mean, I had a couple of vegans admit that once everyone's vegan, I just, the push a button experiment where you push a button, everyone's vegan, and it's all working just fine. Nobody's starving. Then you go, okay, so do we intervene with animals now? Do we take the gazelle out and sort of import a Boston Dynamic, sort of like seitan soy covered robot, right? Yeah. And then have it run away from the lion, and like, do we fabricate, soy made sort of like fruit based animals that run away, such that the other animals can still have at least the sensation of the chase, Jimbob. I mean, it's and they say yes. Not only that, but I asked. There's a company that's developing a jab. Can you even say jab now, or you need to do full code?
I think you can. I call them jibby jabs.
Okay, jibbies. Yeah, there's a company developing a jibby that it creates an allergic reaction to eating meat. And I asked some vegans outright, would you want this to, would you advocate for mothers giving their children this jab at birth? And I can get like at least, I don't know, from what I asked, maybe 10 of them, at least half of them. And some of them were an actual no and became a yes within like 3 minutes. They were like, no way. And I was like, and then they were like, well, I guess it depends on what the real risks are and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
You're like, wow.
Yeah, exactly. You know, regarding go ahead, Posh.
Just as one thing, my favorite route when dealing with vegans is have them define the difference between consciousness and reactivity.
Oh, right.
Oh.
Right, because they would say animals, they have consciousness, so they can feel pain, they feel sad for when their young die, etc. Okay, but plants react to things, to external stimuli, and you not just that smell you get when you mow grass. That is a distress signal, actually. And you say, oh, this smells great, right? So are we all psychotic, I suppose? But also they will react to playing the sound of flowing water. They will start growing roots in that direction. They will react to a single source of light in a darkened room. So they will react to things. So you can say, oh, but they don't have the nervous system that an animal has. But okay, but I'm asking you, where does this break? Where's the break? And if they're atheists, they can't actually say consciousness even exists.
Right.
That's the extra trap. But I want to know what is different between reactivity and consciousness.
Right. Yeah. Like, what's his name? Singe? Is his name Singe?
Synth.
Oh. Synth was like arguing that the cow, his basis for utilitarian morality is the most amount of true beliefs. And I was like, well, why would killing a cow and eating a steak minimize a true belief? And they said, well, the cows have true beliefs. And I said, can you name a false belief a cow had and tell me the difference of how you knew it was a true belief and a false belief? In other words, does a cow have a thought about a thought that contemplates that they think something is grass,
right?
Let's say, not even that they believe that they like the taste of it. Let's make it more external, interactive, like, oh, there's grass. Oh, it's not grass. Did they have like a belief, right? Did they consciously have an experience of believing, or did they just go? And like Posh said, there's no way someone who's a proponent could actually tell you what the difference is, how to spot it, and to take 10 cows and be like, 7 of them had really bad, false beliefs in that trial. And they wouldn't be able to do it, right? Because a belief itself is a peculiar conceptual presupposition, basically, in a way, that is peculiar to human beings. Like the concept of belief itself requires belief, but also assumes belief is this category of the way we think, kind of in time. So there's a belief requires a concept of the past, the present, and the future. It requires all of these nuanced recollections of things, right? It probably, to some extent, a belief about your reality, it maybe even projects all of it together in some weird way, like some sort of like unified projection of what's going on. And to think that cows and other animals who actually could just exist without all of that, right? To even appeal to their evolutionary position, they wouldn't require any of that to just be. They would just be automatons eating, getting killed, killing, running from predators. They're not believing. They don't go, I believe that's a lion chasing me. There's no use. They just run. They could have been running from something that was just a sound, but it doesn't matter, right? I
can't help but make an association with, again, moving us back to this sort of worship of morality versus personal God. And like we see this continual process of like personalizing like non-persons, right? It's like the continual refusal to recognize this sort of divine spark of man, and always try to like push and elevate like abstraction and like animals. right? The things that actually don't have the qualities. And so it's almost the same thing again here, like we kind of saw with the worship of morality over God. I mean, do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, morality, and I think intertwined with truth itself. Some people worship this concept of truth, and you go, "What is it?" And they go,
"Yeah." And how do you get it?
It's just a description of reality. And you're like, that doesn't. So my God's not worthy of worship, but
I wanted to mention Jeranism, right? Jeranism, who said, what did he say?
And what are you talking about? You guys mentioned both Jeranism,
Jeranism.
Yeah,
he's like a flat Earth, pretty big YouTube guy who gets into all.
I thought this was like
categories.
A philosophy or something. I was trying because it's an ism.
No,
like, what are you guys talking about?
No, you probably thought of Jansenism, but it sounds similar enough. But no, this fellow, he responded to Jimbob's video, and he said, God gave, how does he know it's bad to, demand blood sacrifices, drowning babies, talking about the flood, etc., this evil God of the Old Testament? And how does he account for that? How can he justify that being wrong? He says he was given by the Creator this ability to know. Okay, but that means everyone else was as well.
Like
exactly. So why are we disagreeing?
Right.
So what is that fellow over there doing? Is he created by a different creator? Is he intentionally being misled by this creator? It's just you create a paradigm that works up to a point, and after that, you don't want to. You just try and make it as muddy as possible.
And that's why everything comes back to God, right? And so maybe we can speak. I mean, like Jimbob, how? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't your journey back to, again, anatheism, sort of like a return to God after God? I mean, your journey is like your interest in paradigms and sort of moving out of all these, like the world's constantly trying to put us into like a framework to look at the world and then keep us there, while then the actors are moving behind our backs and like controlling the scenes. And we're like trying to step away from all these windows of thought that we're trying to be limited. Mm-hmm. I mean, how has that aided or complemented your own spiritual journey?
Well, it's aided because you realize quickly, at least if you're honest with yourself, is that all the knowledge you have access to is connected to some other web of knowledge. It doesn't mean that all of the knowledge is equally true. Not to say that like that's the concept. It's that you have to then look at, well, if we are seeking truth, and then if you presuppose, in my case, God exists. And so a lot of us are there. God exists. And so even the ones, Jeranism and all those guys, they're very strong in their boots, or at least on a ground, right? But my question is, what is the ground?
Right.
It's not the sensation of being on the ground. You have to know what the ground is. Right. Such that you can name it, look at it, practice. You have to know how to walk on that ground. And these questions are very important to me, because if I am pursuing truth and it leads me to God, but then God leads me to who is God, and then who is God leads me to a specific belief or a religion, then religion leads me to a certain tradition, and these things are all connected. So in like the last year, my interest in this case in orthodoxy, and having gone and to a liturgy and talking about it with Posh and the people I'm actually drawn to, like yourself as well, there's no escaping this thing where you, at least for the people who are outright theists, even if they're deists, if they're going to pursue, the road gets narrow, right? It starts to really close in, and that experience, to me, to be honest, is it's not jarring. It's challenging. It's like being sucked through the eye of a needle, and you don't know if you're ready yet, and you don't know if you're willing, and you don't know if you're going to battle too many things within yourself, and you don't know if you could be a good role model or whatever. So all of this stuff comes into play as for me, I do it live. I basically share where I'm going, what I think on the spot daily. So it is vulnerable for me, but I'm not afraid of it. It's just like, I feel like I'm doing some sort of service, at least, especially if I can sort of cut it a little bit with Posh and put some of the blame on him for anything that
Yeah, it's
or
always good
whatever.
to have a scapegoat for sure.
But generally, yeah, this recently in the last like 5 months at least, it's been a lot about grappling with tradition and this again, this wave of like new age, vague, sort of Gnostic, mystical, like the esoteric. It's in you already. All of everything's embedded.
Right.
Well, if that's the case, why even make a video about how it's all embedded? Everyone should know already.
Should know,
why? What are you even doing? And so for me, it's like, obviously you can't get away from tradition. Like I always explain, is that the moment you discard a tradition and you think you've come to some truth, if it is true, what you've come to, and you want to share it, well, that becomes a tradition. Okay, what's the tradition of sharing this new thing?
Right.
Then how do you preserve it? Tradition. Okay, how do you worship God? Okay, tradition. And even if the tradition is totally not tradition, it's almost like anarchy. Like the statement is no rulers, and then you're like, well, that's now the rule, no rulers. So who enforces the rule, no rulers?
So Anglicanism.
Yeah. But while you're speaking, Jimbob, again, like tradition is a human attempt. Again, if we're preserving truth, which most traditions, at least to their own credit, they self-believe that's what they're doing. It's an attempt to create order that's going to extend into the chaos of the potential future, right? Nobody knows what the future is, but if we agree that we're going to maintain this order, tradition, at least we've sacredly, again, it's like a sacred space. We've created a space that at least we know won't change. And at this place, then we can be comfortable to worship God and do all this stuff. But then outside of it, we can see the rest of Christianity has basically become a progress, right? So then then the distinction between us and the chaos of the future, there is no distinction. We are the chaos.
Yeah, the tradition is trend. And again, people may misinterpret. Again, you two are probably better interpreters of the Bible than me, but this concept of like rejecting tradition, someone with a, read the scripture 1-to-1, your mind to the page might draw from we're supposed to reject traditions of men. And so if when they hear someone like me go, well, you can't escape tradition if you're pursuing the truth and you want to preserve it.
Is of God. So there's a fundamental presuppositional distinction there.
Right. And so that gets a little hairy with people there because there's these keywords that trigger people. Trinity, tradition, robes, hats, rings, hands, kissing, veneration, like iconography. Right. And so there's a lot of like existing morass, like a pile of the moat, the moat around the mind. And a lot of us are perceiving, even me, admittedly, like going to my first liturgy as I told everyone that you're immediately trying to itemize and put into context. Now, we can't escape the past, really. Like, we're always going to bring some level of association, and then we'll make a judgment of the association, even though it's not identical to to the thing we're reminded of. So, like the formation of the how the church looks and the iconography and the priest and the robes and the incense and all of this stuff, you actually have to combat all of your pre-programmed responses to this stuff, because really in that moment, if there's anything to get from this, it would be you can't just use your own personal judgment only. Like you have to actually submit to something, right? And so if you are in fact looking at looking for a church and you don't and you're fighting submission, right? That's also a performative contradiction, wouldn't it? It's like, oh, I want to seek God, and this is pretty much it, but I just don't want to submit to the men of the church or the structure or the behaviors or customs. And really, that's a battle of pride. And so, I don't have that much pride. I have more wrath. More wrath is my sin, which is given by pride, but it shows up as wrath.
It's expressed in a different way.
Yeah, I have less a problem with submitting, but this in me has led me to a lot of different false things too. So there's a little bit of protective. I'm willing to jump into things. That's part of like why I'm able to pursue so many things, so many concepts.
But that's exactly what you're doing with your stream, right? You're helping people think. So it's like, we made a joke, like Jay Dyer and myself, we say we do people's homework. In a way, that's not what you do. What you do is you are Jimbob, and you just routinely express your journey. I mean, it's the brand, the stream. It's really, like you said, you thinking things out on the fly and working things out. And so what you're doing then is you're constantly thinking for people. So you're not doing people's homework. It's just you're on your own journey, and you're just explaining your justification and how you're moving through it in a serious way, which then really helps other people, because it says, okay, well, I need to go on my own journey then. Like Jimbob's doing it. He's working things out, and he's in a different place than he was a year ago, and he's making it, that kind of makes sense. Maybe I don't know what it is, but I'll think about it. I'll look into it. And I think that's really helpful, because it's giving permission for people to think and explore and go on their own journey. And I know, because the few times I've been on your stream, the Protestantism stuff and regarding Orthodoxy comes up frequently, especially when I'm sitting in front of all these icons, and it's quite clear what the direction I'm coming from.
That's interesting.
You need to get boomer drapes. That is the key.
Boomer drapes. Posh, you're cradle Orthodox, so there is no walking into a jarring, situation where all these associations come in. Maybe if you went into a Catholic church and they're like, oh, some of that, whatever, you'd make all these categories and labels and assumptions. But you went partially away from your faith. But is it the same thing where suddenly you kind of peered out of your paradigm and then judged it, and then were like, oh, I'm going to hang out outside of this for a while?
Well, the thing is, when I went through my atheist phase, returning to faith was in large part due to creationism. And a lot of that was done by Protestants. And when they bring up they used to at least bring up certain arguments like, call no man your father, images, and I didn't have the framework which I do now. It sounded very clear, right? The Bible clearly says this and clearly says that. So I had a crisis of faith. I didn't, move away from orthodoxy, but it was more like clinging on for dear life than, being, comfortable with it. It took time to find the answers. But the thing is, when I saw icons again, I wanted to venerate them, but I wasn't sure if I ought to. It wasn't, I'm being told I ought to, but I don't want to, right? It was the opposite.
Internal, yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. I was going to say, and for me on the outside, never even growing up Orthodox, so you had an exposure, again, anatheism, left, and then came back. It's like when I entered into the church, the veneration of icons was kind of jarring at first, but at the same time, once you do it, it feels so natural, because it's like family. Just like if you were to go home and see photographs of your grandparents or your parents, or because what it is, it's the tradition that, again, has been moving through time since those apostles. So whether you agree with them or not, irrelevant, but we can at least trace this particular tradition all the way back to them and the theology through the 7 councils. And it's basically the same thing through time, and it still exists.
There's a point to be made. I think it's in Galatians 3, the beginning of Galatians 3, where St. Paul says, was Christ not portrayed to you as crucified, right? Whether that was very much physical portrayal, right? But we know, again, the tabernacle, right? The tent, the temple, everything was full of a type of iconography, right? Not what we have today, because that takes a certain tradition, right? And it instantiates it. But I'd like to make a point on tradition, because the word paradosis is translated in places into English, in places where it's talked badly about, as tradition, but when it's talked about positively, it's translated as teachings. Right, because translation is interpretation. There's no getting away from
absolutely.
that, because The no two languages, even very similar ones,
Right, they don't
or
match
even
up 1 to 2. That's a misnomer.
Right. For example, I speak British English. You speak dirty colonial English. But
Hey, don't be jealous because of our twang.
We have the freedom to speak incorrectly, and you're like, damn it, I said them instead of there.
I know. Yeah, we're the creative side of the Anglosphere.
We don't even self-correct.
For you.
We don't even self-correct.
Right. But there are noticeable differences between British and American English.
For sure.
Right? And let's one example as a thought experiment I came up with was, let's say there was a hypothetical line, a verse in the scriptures that said in Koine Greek, right, that the Last Supper took place on the first floor. And the thing is, in American English, first floor and ground floor are synonymous.
Correct.
But in British English, first floor is the first floor above the ground floor, which would be the second floor for you. So how would you translate it?
The upper room.
That would be a good one. And if I was translating for a British audience, right, I would say first floor. If I was translating for an American audience, I would say the second. But the thing is, then, 100 years from then, someone finds my two translations and says, aha, these are incompatible. These are differences. Right. So the source text must have been different.
Did Jesus even exist? I mean, this guy's saying first floor, this guy's saying second floor. Like, I'm pretty suspicious he's made up. I think it's Apollo, actually.
Right. It's Quetzalcoatl or something.
So there is an actual reality to lost in translation, being that interpretation is not translation, but sometimes it could be for one thing, right? There could be some like, oh, we have that word too. A ratio is 1-to-1. Great. That works out perfectly. But a lot of times it just doesn't. They just don't. Whatever culture, in this case, we're probably referring to scripture, but even in just general language, some cultures just don't have even the context for some things that are referenced. And so, I mean, is that a hindrance to traditional preservation of church customs and scripture? Does that account for something that might be lost, that might be inconsequential to faith?
Well, let me give you a direct example. So when it says Saint James, the Bible doesn't refer to him as Saint James, but James, the brother of Christ. Right. Already within that, in Serbian, and this would go to Greek to an extent, but in Serbian, for example, the word brother, brat, is not the same category as the word brother is in English. To you, brother and sister are siblings. But you then have a category of cousin. Right. We don't have a category of cousin.
I've learned this with Eastern European peoples, is that people say my brothers and my sisters, they're meaning they're cousins. And I'm like, what? That's not my brother. What are you talking about?
But because you would distinguish them. Right. We don't, and we can, say, and this might get a bit tricky, so I'm not going to go very much into it. We don't even have the same category as uncle and aunt.
Right.
We have in Serbian a separate uncle as brother of your father, separate uncle as brother of your mother, and then an uncle who is the husband of either of your parents. And same with aunts, and these are different terms. So you would say, for example, your cousin he is my brother according to my paternal uncle. Maybe, again, we can't really translate.
English, trying to explain, how it would be.
Yeah, categories that don't exist. And so saying brother of Christ does not mean the direct sibling of Christ. Right. And this can cause, because some people will say, oh, how do you believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary? Well, because they might think the Bible clearly says so and so. Mm-hmm. But unless you have this context, which is transferred by tradition, right. So a Greek who would come and study this language to evangelize would make a note of that. And when he is teaching his disciples, he will make sure that they figure out whether they should use that term or this term, and this will affect the translation, etc., etc. But you need the tradition to maintain it.
Right.
You can't just take a translation that has had this in mind, but then read it without having this in mind. You will come to wrong conclusions.
Let me add to this, too, regarding Jimbob's general question regarding, because this was kind of rooted within religious tradition, is that within Orthodoxy, you can't also divorce the interpretation of Scripture from the Holy Spirit. So there's an entire theology that we don't just like approach the Bible and then interpret it towards a correct way. It's an inspired reading, and so we listen to holy people that read the Scripture because of the noetic cleansing of their morality and their engagement with the energies of God. They can understand the depth of what's being said more so. So Orthodoxy then believes that it is, and this where it preserves, this is different from Catholicism in that it preserves the language groups of the countries it moves into, because Orthodoxy has a theology where, as the church, it goes into places where the church does not exist, and it's supposed to then fuse and melt with that culture and language to sanctify it. It doesn't change it. It doesn't make it Latin. It doesn't force it to become Roman. It says, oh, you guys are Bulgarians, and we've been fighting you for hundreds of years. Well, now you're Orthodox. Okay, great. Here's the church. And now it goes into your culture, and it becomes your guys' own church because it's the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. It's your language. It's your history. It's your men. It's your fathers. It's your ancestors.
Is there no flamenco antiphons then? They don't like, jive it up in different places? Like add a little. Wait, actually, I wanted to talk about this. I saw some videos showing up on my feed. I stopped using the term it's randomly showed up on my feed. It was Western Orthodoxy, and there was like a little video kind of exposing maybe there was a couple. Not to paint the full picture of all Western Orthodoxy, but it was like a couple in maybe churches in like major cities or New York, and they were having like gay marriages and stuff. And this video was kind of like it wasn't a well put together. It was more like a review of like the things to look out for. And it was trying to highlight and make a distinction between the two. What is that distinction? And is Western more open to vulnerable to this kind of progressive trend?
May I take a stab at this one, Posh? So I would say, in regards to, I don't know what the video you're talking about, but I could definitely understand if it's talking about the Greek jurisdiction. So we have a real problem right now in Orthodoxy. And this is also part of prophecy. So there's a context then that this is a side note to the conversation, but there's a belief within the Orthodox Church that the Orthodox Church is going to fracture and that the true church is going to become smaller and smaller and smaller. But the true believers are going to be able to know the theology and follow the fracturing of the true church, and they're going to stay with it. Okay, and so we believe that the church is going to be attacked, and in a way, we're already seeing this through many of the patriarchs for example, in Constantinople, in Greece, in Jerusalem. But then we have in America, in the West, we have the Archbishop of Goarch, which is the Greek Orthodox Church. It's the most well-funded Orthodox jurisdiction, has the most money, the most prominence. Also, is totally tied to the Democratic political party. I've listened to a lot of insiders. In fact, a Serbian man who I was getting a PhD with, who was working with the bishop in the Goarch, and they literally go to the parties that raise money for funds and stuff like this. And so unfortunately, the Greek church specifically, but also then we have the Orthodox Church of America, have both been subverted, and they're doing so quite publicly, where then other jurisdictions, Antiochian's not as bad. That's the one I'm a part of. But Rokor, the Serbian churches, the Romanian churches particularly, those three jurisdictions have been really good in regards to calling out BLM, the homosexuality, the Ukraine, Russia, this type of stuff. But we see then the Archbishop of Goarch just married or just baptized and adopted children of two gay men in Greece. So he's then the Archbishop of Greek Church in America, but for some reason then goes to Greece to baptize two boys, but the boys were actually adopted by two men that are homosexuals. And this is a big problem because, again, typically for the children to be brought in, usually the parents are already part of the church, and if they're part of the church and they're homosexual, like that shouldn't be allowed, and that whole process shouldn't be going forth. So it's caused a problem, and we're already seeing now the sort of fracturing of the church, and the Ukraine situation hasn't helped at all either. So that is just a quick skinny then on orthodoxy. In regards then to the second point of Western orthodoxy, I would actually take a little bit of umbrage, because my experience as a convert is that the converts, the Western converts to orthodoxy, tend to know the most about the theology, and it's not any slight against cradles. It's just cradles, generally speaking. If it's, again, it's like if you grow up in swimming in those waters, well, you're just accustomed to it. You just go to the church, you light some candles, you kiss the icons, you go to liturgy once in a while, you're there for Pascha, you break your eggs, and you go there for Christmas. And that's about it. And it's your culture, it's your identity, it's what everybody does, and you look forward to it. But as a convert, well, then I have to learn church history, I have to see the schism, I have to learn the theology, why is this different? So that's why then you're going online, and this orthosphere is rising, but they're all Americans. But why? Because they have already, we have to read all this junk. I mean, it's not junk, it's great, it's theology, it's patristics, but we have to get through all this stuff to then realize, oh, this is what this is. And then that's really what we're doing, is trying to explain all this research, because really, Orthodoxy was the last religion to come to the United States. And it came by way of the Bolshevik Revolution. It came the opposite way. All the other religions basically came from the West to the United States, coming around the world this way. Orthodoxy went the other way, Russia to Japan, into Alaska, down to California. So Orthodoxy was the last world religion, technically, to really come to the United States. So it hadn't been here very long. And then with the internet, this is the first time, really last 20, 30 years in the world, that you could then look into all this Orthodox stuff, because it needs to be in the lingua franca, English. And so all this stuff's being translated in English in the last 30 years, really. So then it's like, for the first time in world history, the world can actually convert to Orthodoxy without, like, the church converting your nation, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that it may have been a title of the video. They just assumed it, because the thing you're talking about was actually depicted. The gay couple with the sons getting baptized, they included that. It was like a really poorly sort of done, slash videos and photos, kind of just going for like 3 minutes of what's going on. And so they may, whoever posted that may have just miscategorized Western.
Good. Well, there's a Western Rite too, and this is also a controversial thing in Orthodoxy. It's basically, there's a movement, and there's a whole group of school, and so I'm not going to insert my own opinion, because it will maybe upset certain people, but there's what's called the Western Rite. So you went to an Orthodox liturgy, and you probably saw what it was. Well, you went to a Greek parish, I believe, so you saw the Byzantine Rite. So it was very circular. We repeat ourselves multiple times with Lord's have mercies, glory, all this stuff. And so this is the type of the Orthodox worship, is that we do things in a circular fashion, because the idea is when we go to liturgy, we're actually entering into the vehicle, the worship of God, that is outside space and time. So we don't do it in a linear process like the Latin West does. The Mass is a very linear formation of worship. Well, we have what are called Western Rite churches that basically perform orthodoxy with Orthodox theology, and they're accepted by the church, but they perform it in a Western linear Latin Mass style formation. Oh,
so
and that's called the Western Rite Church.
They made it Broadway.
They have big, and so then it's like, well, then people say, well, should we allow it or should we not? And the thing is, well, there are two schools of thought is, well, a lot of Catholics convert by that way, because they can go to a Western Rite Orthodox church and it looks the exact same, but it's our theology and it's our tradition. And then they can get normalized, but then ideally come to the true church. Other people say, well, why are we doing that? That's just basically like watering down. Like, that's not the historical tradition. That's not the Byzantine or the Slavonic liturgy. Why are we doing that?
It seems that what's really clear, and it's with progressive, general, vague Christianity too, is that as these churches and their cohesion and how unified they are in tradition, as they get smaller, there might be groups of them or people who basically are in charge of outreach. Well, how do we get more people? How do we convert more people? How do we do this? And so the tendency in any scenario, the fault, but it's a tendency is to just kind of water things down and be like, anybody, just we'll change it a little bit. It's just to get people here. Don't worry. No, there's still a good route back to the truth.
Right.
It's like a little side road, right? And it seems like taking that, it's almost like usury. It's like you're taking a loan and you're doing it in a way that you didn't earn it, and you're giving people a route, and you think, well, pragmatically, well, maybe if we soften it up and water it down, we could at least get more people in. And it sounds like reasonable at first, but then you start to lose it. And then what happens then? Who's going to stop it further from watering? Maybe right. Now what was once watering down to something this much, now you want to access these other people who need an in. And so you water it, you create another door. And it seems like that's what you're talking about. It's So progressivism is not only, in my view, an active act against Christianity, but also progressivism is also a symptom of watering down. So it's like they kind of work and
their
together.
Arguments, and if you're talking to a Western right, they'd say, no, there's evidence that there was Western right Orthodox rituals before the schism. So they would say before 1054, we have evidence that there was Orthodox liturgical services that were still in obedience back to Constantinople, not part of the papacy, that performed in these what they would say a Western Rite style. And therefore it is historical. And they would say it's part of the heritage of Western peoples, and that Western Orthodox people should be able to worship in the unique way that Western people have uniquely worshiped, which would be the sort of Catholic Latin style. And that's what that their argument would be, is that, well, if we have evidence before the schism, and then the more traditional side, usually the Slavonic and the Greek side, says, no, like this is the way that we do it different. It was the Latin Church that changed up. Like, why are we going to normalize the way that you guys changed up as what we would consider maybe a change in the historical liturgy? Why would we then normalize that as your heritage or your historical identity? Just come back to the whole church. Just come back to the historical way. And so it's a contention within Orthodoxy right now. But in regards to the West, and I think, Posh, maybe you can speak on this because it sounded like you were shaking your head. The Western converts are really doing a lot in regards to the study and the promotion of the theology and the spreading of orthodoxy right now. So which is ironic, and it kind of makes sense, right? So it's like, where do you find the strongest believers of orthodoxy? It's like Western converts in the most degenerate parts of the world in the West, right? So where's the degeneracy the worst? And then you're actually finding then the people that are like latching on to orthodoxy the most frequently. So it's kind of an interesting irony.
It's a very common theme in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Being in Babylon made people, I suppose some of them fell off, right, and worshipped other gods, but it wasn't like back over in, at that point, Judah, they were doing great. No, they weren't. And after they get reprimanded, which a lot of our saints say this is what communism was to us, and prior to that, Islamic invasions of all sorts, you need reprimanding. Right. But the Westerners, it's like when I mentioned my faith was shaken by call no man your father, etc. Westerners who start from that have had to learn the things I learned, but from the get-go, because I can by inertia just go up to the entirety of my life without even noticing that that's potentially a problem.
Right.
So, right, it's like I probably know more about English grammar than most native speakers because they learn it through practice.
That's a great
since
example.
Their childhood.
That's exactly, and you see that all the time, right? People who learn English as a second language, often, even with scholars, often the great grammarians, many Germans, for example. Because the way that they study language, and because they have to learn it from the bottom all the way to the top, whereas like I swim in English, I'm really not that good at grammar. I just it's just the way I express myself. I don't even think about it.
Something sounds off.
Yeah, it's my language is my ear, exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really good point. Anything else you guys want to? Well, this has been a great conversation. Just diving into and again thinking a lot about these paradigms. I wrote down a few that we didn't even get into, which was the Bible, the church paradigm. Keenan had a great point mentioned in our live chat. It's like that's another great paradigm, is the paradigm of Protestants worship the Bible. They reject the tradition that gave it to them. They don't obviously think that way, but there's a paradigm is like, well, we recognize the legitimacy of the Bible. We reject the tradition that gave us it. And you guys worship men. We worship the Word of God. Like, so that's an interesting paradigm. I want to point that. I was going to mention the demonic monism, that again, the paradigm that really, whether it be the veganism or the atheism or the evolutionary theory or the utilitarianism, is that it all then is the privileging of unity over multiplicity. And that is a presupposition of paradigm that is so subtle that most people have no idea that they're influenced by Plato, right? I was going to do a members video called the Platonic Malaise. All these things that people don't realize that they actually have adopted Platonism. He came up with these ideas, like the idea that non-physical is better than physical, right? I mean, and people, they just do not realize that they've already adopted all these presuppositions. And unity over multiplicity, I think, is a really big one. And it ties into the whole, like, I'm not who like David Patrick, really, I'm not really who you think I am. I'm something higher. I'm something else.
Or even like on a lower level, culturally, like diversity, inclusivity. It's all bound to this concept of this absolute unity, an M&M of every color, citizens of the world. These concepts, they can't actually be, actualized without sort of like this very broad, really utility based pursuit in the world. Like the attempt to ground God or to make, I mean, it makes sense that anyone who says God is just all oneness would then act in the world trying to basically water down everything that's very sharp. And any road that's narrow, and just be like, can't we just pave a couple roads by the road? We're not going to get rid of your road. It's still narrow. And you're like, okay. What do you mean? And then they pave a road on each side of that road, right? And then they pave more roads, right? And then eventually the roads merge. And you're like, what's the problem?
Yes.
You know, it's all the same God, man. Right. You know, we're all God. Right. You're God. I'm God. And it just, that's where it goes. Yeah. It makes so much sense that people behave and argue not just based on the world, how the world occurs to them, but how the world occurs to them based on their starting point, their presupposition. So if people behave consistent with how the world occurs to them, then you ask another question: what dictates how the world occurs to them? And again, it's the title of this stream, the paradigm informs how the world occurs to them. And they don't think for a second that maybe how the world is occurring to them isn't actually how the world's occurring, right?
Right.
And that's when you question.
Which they think about us, right? Because that's how they actually feel about everybody who doesn't believe what they believe, right?
Right.
And so it's ironic. It's sort of self-projection. But when you were speaking, I thought about, again, the unity, and you're talking about some of the political language that is used, the equity and the diversity is our strength. And really, it's like what they're doing is they're continually redefining, again, as Posh talked about with language, they're continually redefining words to put us on like a grid, right? And so the grid is our Coomer cell, it's eating our bugs, but the grid is you're white. But he's Slavic, he's Russian, or he's Serbian. Is he? I'm American, but I'm in the mud of Europe because I'm of all these things. So are we the same thing, or what about the Asian guy who? I mean, because he's kind of white too. No, he's yellow. It's like, well, what is this? Well, it's redefining. It's putting us on a single. It's a circle. And they just have all these different cutouts. So, you're transgender, queer, ableist, left knee, whatever it is. It's like, well, then we have a box for you too. You can be right here. And what we're just all on this monistic grid, locked into place due to these false identities that they give us. And then that's how that's how they control us. And that from a theistic worldview, it's all a freaking satanic job, guys. They're trying to kill us. Right.
Well, and they also, some of them try to then reverse that sort of like fluidity of identity. And then they try to project that back onto God. So they try to hijack God make Christ like this, like trans, non-binary
socialist,
dude, lady.
Marxist. Yeah, he's holding. He has a Che Guevara shirt on, like in front of the apostles.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. And they try, they make the rainbow cross and all that stuff, and they try to. And again, there's probably I think you already did a stream, but this is this like Christ consciousness that Christ isn't a being or a person or a historical figure. It's just again, I saw Marty Leeds in the chat that before.
I end up blocking him because he's totally derailing the point of the stream.
Yeah, that's his job. That's his job. That's what he does. But this thing that it's this abstract sort of like all-encompassing, impersonal unifier, which is like this weird half truth. Like it's like the attempt to unify, but only in the lens of matter in the world. Like we're going to unify, to some end, right? To some end here. That there's not a new world. There's not a new earth. There's not a new time. There's this, and then our job here now is to fix it. And if everyone could just convert to that they are God and everyone's God and everything's the same, if we can just do that, which is so self-refuting, because if it were true, there would be no progress toward any of it, because you'd be there. You'd always be there.
Right.
There would be no thing to fix because brokenness would be illusory. It would just be
it's the utopianism paradigm, right? That's what I wrote down as you're talking about. It's the utopian on this side of eternity paradigm, which is what it's the revolutionary spirit. It's what Billington talks about in The Fire in the Minds of Men, that since basically the Enlightenment, that there's been a spirit of revolution. What are we revolving around? What are we flipping? What are we revolting against, really? Right. And it's continually just the way the world, it's like nature itself. It really is God. It's the structure of the fallen world is like they're revolting against that. So it's transhumanism, it's Marxism, it's the Great Reset, it's the metaverse. It's always utopians on this side. And then they say, well, you Christians, I mean, what are you guys going to do? And it's like, I'm just a wretched little sinner. Lord have mercy on me. Utopia doesn't exist till Christ comes back. And they're like, well, a lot of good you are. And it's like, God bless you, brother. God bless you.
I've mentioned this before, is that if you remove Christ and remove salvation, then Christianity becomes somewhat nihilistic, or at least pessimistic, because there's no, and this annoys people who are Christians who want to adopt a natural, some sort of natural pursuit in the world, a physical outcome in the world, to mark so they can put the flag down, put the flag down. I did Christianity and I left the marker, I put the boundary down. And now that impulse is there for us because we want to, be in communion with God. We want our fruits to be good in the world. We prefer that the external world match our theology. So it makes sense, but that couldn't possibly be the goal. And so when you say, no, that's not the paradigm, that's not exactly what is being pursued here, they go, well, what are you going to do then? You're just going to let this stuff happen? I mean, even your example of the prophecy, it's prophecy that the church splinters and splinters.
Yeah, as we enter closer and closer to the end times, it's going to splinter further and further.
So even within Orthodoxy, there's probably the impulse to go, we have to stop this, which is partly true, but also partly not true. Right. And so there's this paradox. It's the attempt to
stop it, though, that preserves the basis that
the one
that doesn't change.
Right. So it's not like a revolutionary stop where you revert.
It's the opposite, really, right? It's the revolutionary spirit to defend, which is really like the true masculine impulse of your family and your kids. And the same things with church and God and tradition. It's like, it's the opposite of the revolutionary spirit. It's like, look, like I can't change. And it's tied to, I circled when you're talking, is the morality. I put down morality, sacrifice, and telos. And that morality, again, we realize that it's a sacrifice of immediate pleasure. But it's part of the telos, the purpose of man to become divinized, to become like God. And so we're doing this. Yeah, it would be nihilistic if there was no rewards. If like you're to be Christian and just like then there's just blackness once you die, it'd be like the ultimate nihilism, because we're like, yeah, just ignore all the pleasures. They're going to trap you anyways, man. And then we're saying, no, actually what we do is through morality, through the containment, through the self-control that I build, the discipline, and then the morality, which we believe to be objective, I can then move into a state where I'm not that pleasure-seeking animal. Like the impulses that controls that person doesn't control me. I'm literally set free. That's where, again, become slaves to Christ to become free. It's like you follow the moral dictates, you're actually set free from the ways that they control us in the world, right? All the thirst traps, all the sexual degeneracy. Like, if a girl can't tempt you, if she can't get you to sleep with her, like, then women don't have any more power over you. You're set free. And again, it comes back to the traditional understanding.
Right. Yeah, that little economics thing that's been presented goes away. That's one of the worst that I've seen, is that the two people, men and women, and I'm glad that like someone like Andrew Wilson's debating these pickup artists, because there's a pickup artist who's the man who's training the men to look at the world, look at women through this lens of conquer, like scoreboard stuff. Right. And then there's probably these female coaches who are training the women based on what they think the men want. And so it's all dictated by like pornography and all of this other stuff. Right. And they're both operating to each other under illusion. So they get at the bar, and then one has the coach, and she's like, I'm going to do my thing that they coached me to do. I'm going to act all submissive, overly submissive, but as a form of power and control. And I'm going to do all the things in the videos, right? I mean, but I'm going to dominate. It's a dominant. I'm powerful. Be on the Beyonce, like in their ear, like a little earphone.
Yeah, exactly.
Beyonce. Yeah. And then the guy's like, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna take what I want because I deserve it, and that's what masculinity. And they're both operating in these false paradigms, right? That just destroy what they actually want. The irony, which is just this union that transcends their physical urges, but coincides with their physical urges, but transcends them too. And so that whole thing, I mean, I'm glad there's a war on that now. Right. And again, it's not because we're going to get back to some glorified postcard, right? As Posh put it, like just castles and these horses that are just sitting outside because they're there, and this kind of stuff. But that's a difficult thing that I think needs to be at least acknowledged when we're talking about stuff, even with your friends and family. This impulse for all of us to go to this physical outcome, right? Because it's right there. We can imagine it, right? We can be like, we could see what it could be if only just we got to. And that also brings a point to, you could actually preserve. Well, you could do things to preserve what you thought was what you believed to be your tradition in church. But if you don't preserve the discipline within that group of people who are preserving the church, in other words, the means by which you preserve something might actually completely destroy the thing you preserve. Right. And so that's kind of that's part of our battle between being animal and man, right? Being this balance of like, well, I'm going to do what I need to do, and then we'll get there, and then we'll figure out, and then we'll seek forgiveness because of all the things we did to preserve what we wanted to
I'm just going to make my millions of dollars, and then I'll find God.
And then I'll figure it out. I'm just going to just use the Orthodox, Christianity just to make a lot of money and talk. It's like, and then what?
Yeah, all he did was take ortho logos. And then he just that's really, as you dive deeper in the journey in the Peterson, that's really what his thing was. Is he like introduced men to sort of subtle Orthodox logos concepts.
What he did is he basically was like, it's like Imagine Orthodox, but just put it in Urban Outfitters, It's like that's what people need, and that's exactly what he did. He took what is like what it has a strong foundation. He just put it right on, you go in there and there's a book on everything, and they make it cool, and it has like this cloth cover too, and it's much shorter. It's not a Bible, but it's
it's 12 rules.
Exactly.
Yeah, the 10 Commandments in that New Testament, that's too much, man. Here's 12 rules.
Right. The image that appeared in my head when you mentioned like how everyone's chasing around in a circle with all these crises, is it race, is it economics and class, is it this? And I just imagined people chasing each other around in a circle, and in the background it's the Benny Hill music, but it keeps getting louder and louder and louder, and now we're at the point where the music is so loud that it starts being eerie and ominous, and it's like, wait. That's the first thing.
It's a good image. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good mental image. Jimbob, when you were talking, I did a video talking about, I forget the name of it now or off the top of my head, but basically just what I call the Jezebel effect. And so when we were talking about, your example of the woman and the man that are coming together at the bar for this sort of, they're going to lure each other, right? They're going to somehow perform techniques to get each other. It's a very mechanistic underway of relationships, but that I think the Bible perfectly, describes in such simple, allegorical ways, and that is, again, the fall of Adam, right? We don't believe that creation fell when Eve ate the apple. It wasn't until the man listened to Eve that Adam turned away. He knew that he heard God tell him not to eat from the tree, right? So he knew from God, and then he turned away from God and listened to the woman to do something that he knew he wasn't supposed to do. And then that's when creation fell. And so you look at then Jezebel in the Old Testament and King Ahab, and he was this weak, simpy king, and he allowed the Israel, the kingdom, to start worshiping Baal, which was a child sacrificial deity. And it was all due to his wife Jezebel, who was, we believe to be beautiful and probably vivacious and sexual. And she basically dominated her husband, and she kind of ruled the kingdom through him. And it's like, that's exactly this inversion. That's exactly this demonic monism, is that it's because it is men's fault. We can blame the women the way that they are, but it's due to the lack of an authority. So Jezebel's not under any authority. Eve disobeying God, and then Adam okaying the disobedience is the perpetuation of man continually following the woman. And the woman, then, it's like, whether it's our sexual relationships, whether it's the sexual temptations on Instagram, whether it's the pornography, it's like the only way we stop the Jezebel effect is that men have to, it's semen retention. It's stop masturbating. It's stop watching porn. It's like we have to become the man. We have to develop ourselves as men and not let women actually have power over us. And as we do that and we focus on God, it's like we're the second Adam. And to say, just like Christ, we're turning away from the woman. Doesn't give a shit what she has to say or what she wants. Doesn't matter. And if you're into that stuff, then you're not going to be with me, because God's going to bring the one for me, and I'm going to focus on God and my purpose. And so then it's like men have to rediscover that you have a purpose, you have to focus on your work, and you have to do what's right, and then the other stuff will come.
And also, it allows the woman to then follow and realize that she doesn't have to be the Jezebel.
Exactly. It's going to bring the right type of women.
They're going to, and you could actually probably alter someone who's actually in that position, who thinks they just thought that was the way. Like they just were like, well, it worked. I mean, I was able to manipulate a lot of men and, and stuff. And then suddenly there's someone who's like firmly standing in a position, right, and pointing north and going, no, we're going that way. And then the person's like, the woman's like, oh, my tricks don't work. But then they realize they don't want to live a life doing tricks and mechanical gestures. They want,
and that's why they don't stick with those men who fall victim to their tricks. They marry those men and then they divorce them.
They don't respect them. Yeah, they don't even like them.
They don't respect them, because that's the simp. Adam was the first simp, and we post Christ, then we just have to follow him. And by doing that, and then it's like a real war. It's like we don't need to demean women. Stop talking about women. We know how women are. We know.
Also, if you go too far in the other direction, you get this like mid-cow.
Exactly. We're not mid-cow.
You just go MGTOW. You just go the way opposite spectrum, right? Or you're just like, that's it.
Yeah,
a different type of gamma male.
Women,
yeah, different kind. Yeah.
Can I bring some Old
Go
Testament
ahead, Posh.
in?
Join, bro.
So, if you read the story of Adam and Eve and the apple, it says Eve gave one to Adam, which implies that he was like there, right? She didn't run over like 10 miles like the Forrest Gump over to bring him an apple. Not an apple, let's not get into that. Right, exactly. And he was there, and he was watching it and didn't do anything about it. That's a big thing. And then he doesn't even blame the woman. He blames God for giving him the woman. So that's the worst thing of all. But then you mentioned Ahab and Jezebel was doing this Order 66 on the priests and prophets of Yahweh.
Yep.
Throughout the kingdom. And at one point, Ahab says in his court, are there any priests of Yahweh here? Or prophets of Yahweh? Like he's like, wait a minute. He doesn't even realize, he's so aloof that it doesn't even matter. And then they say, well, there's the Elijah fellow.
Yeah, that one guy.
And he says, "Oh God, he always brings bad news."
Yeah, isn't that the world right now? It's like, oh, those damn Christians. It's like they're going to tell me to be moral.
The good news is the bad news. Exactly. Yeah, I got it now. That's hilarious.
And Elijah, I heard this from Father Stephen DeYoung. His Hebrew, and I checked up on it, and it's so true. His Hebrew is broken. When he says it will not rain anymore, and translations tend to be very poetic and all that, but sometimes the Hebrew isn't. It's meant to be very direct. So he literally says something like, "It no rain no more," because he is spending his time in the desert, in prayer, wearing that piece of cloth basically made from tufts of hair the camel leaves when it scratches against something, right? The most basic subsistence living. He didn't go in and start calling down lightning on people, right? Which is what fire of heaven is. In films it tends to be like this vortex of flames coming down. Fire of heaven is lightning because it comes from the heaven and it hits something and that thing catches on fire. So calling it fire of heaven is a great thing. That's the second one. I wanted to mention a third one, but it sort of went off as we were laughing at people who do things that we do every day on a smaller scale.
You're referencing Old Testament examples, right?
Right. I also wanted to the thing how Rome came in and conquered Judah. You don't hear about battles because there were no battles. Why? Because Judah were afraid of the Greeks, and so they had a pact with Rome. And after the Greeks were summarily, defeated, Pompey basically came in and said, "Hey, we're here to protect you. And do you know what we need to protect you? All these armed people. So go in, boys."
And your taxes.
Right, because and that is King Josiah, and taxes, right, and work power and whatever. But King Josiah, right, he first tries to bribe off the Assyrians, who wiped the northern kingdom of Israel. But he was supposed to be faithful in God, and he realizes his mistake, fixes it by being faithful to God, not by going Andrew Tate and
right.
You should start. I support going to the gym, but like if you go to the gym, we'll all be based and trad, and then we'll fight off the Assyrians. Nope. God is very clear later on. He sends in the Babylonians. Right. So there's no way. I think it confuses people because they almost, instead of Christianity being the telos, and then traditionalism being the methodology by which we get to the telos. Right. These are flipped. So being based in trad, which is somehow from Christianity, but it's not Christianity.
Right. And you're seeing it with the America First movement, right? The whole Nick Fuentes Groyper thing. You're seeing exactly that. You're finding, okay, all these guys are trad Caths or trad Christians or Protestants.
Trad cats.
And then they promote politics over religion. You're finding out some of them are closet homosexuals. There are a lot of weird things going on. They like promote sort of being childish with, chicken nuggies and chalky milk. And it's like
cat people,
yeah, cat boy.
Men.
It's like, what is going on?
Posh, that's another parallel with that efficiency as the goal too. Again, it's just parallel again to like this concept of where you just properly set it up, where you have your Christian telos, and then the tradition is informed by that. And then it's even in faith, you're still kind of like moving forward, but it's in faith and it's constantly in check and struggles and tripping and falling and getting up and all this.
Keenan
Whereas
said trad cats.
Yeah, trad cats. Whereas the inverse of that is just you get strong and you get really efficient at what you're doing, and you make a lot of money, and then you have the power. Right. It's like this concept where that's where the masculinity is, and when ironically the true masculinity is actually in submission to God. But people go, well, no, I can't be in submission to anything because that's not masculine, right? And that's why I think not to over,
Sorry. I just remembered what I wanted to say about God bringing up women when men fail. That's what I wanted to say, because Moses didn't want to circumcise his children. So his wife does it and gives him right. No, he had to be in submission.
I know that's
to
Old
God.
Testament. I'm lying. I'm kidding. I'm joking.
I know. but and then his wife says something on the lines of, "You are now my bride," when she gives him the knife, because he was a weakling. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
It is from God. No one wanted to do it. It wasn't like fun, but that was the point of the sacrifice, right? Another thing is,
well, can I add to this the idea that, again, Christianity, it actually elevates women, right? Again, look at the Theotokos. We're saying that God couldn't enter into space and time except through a woman, the same way both of us got here. You know, all three of us got here through a woman, and God did the same thing. They didn't mean to cut you off. Continue.
Right, and she's literally
the
by us considered the highest created being.
Yeah, the highest we can aspire to is the mother of God, which is an oxymoron because she's created. She's only the mother of his humanity.
Yeah, I don't know if you have the icon of her as we're approaching the Dormition. No, I meant the Dormition.
The Dormition,
because you have her on her deathbed, and I have one here. But and then he is behind there holding her as a child.
Right, you see the inverse. Right, the inverse.
Right, he is her creator, but as a man, he is a son of a woman. Right, bruising the head of the snake and all that, son of man, that son of Adam.
That's where we move in outside logic, right? But that's the mystery, is that Christianity isn't saying, hey, look, we have the most logical worldview. We're saying, well, it is to a point, but now we're dealing with God. This isn't a sort of self-containing logical system like numbers. We're saying logic comes from God, and we can use it all the way up to the point that reveals his mystery. And that's why we can use logic to get all the way point where we see the dialectic collapse, because that's expressing this mystery, right? The mystery that he can't be contained. I was recently talking with somebody who's really interested in orthodoxy, good guy, shout out to my brother, if he's watching, he knows who he is, who's struggling with Islam. He keeps reading the Quran, and he's saying, look, man, they're not doing the Quran right. They're listening to the Hadith. They're doing X, Y, Z. It's like, or, the Quran's not that bad. And I'm saying, bro, like, at the paradigmatic level, it's an absolutely divine, simple understanding of God, very similar to the Catholicism, very influenced by Neoplatonism. We're rejecting that because it's monistic. It then limits God to oneness and not multiplicity. The Trinity has to be it. And then it's like, and it's difficult for him to grasp that because he wants to be able to logically confine God. And he's saying, well, the majority of the world religions don't believe in the Trinity. And it's like, well, then who's making the presupposition that truth is believed by the majority of the world? Like, what? That doesn't even mean anything. Who cares what the majority of the world religions say?
The problem with that, what you said, they're doing Islam wrong. It reminds me of one of my favorite videos of Jay, is the response to Taylor Marshall and Timothy Flanders. He and Sneck made the response video. And the funniest thing is this fellow, Timothy, he converts from Orthodoxy to Catholicism, saying what he understood is that had that burning in the bosom, right? He understood the thing that was stopping him from converting to Rome was this pride that didn't let him submit. And then they, I don't know if they start or end the stream by praying for the Pope to convert to the proper faith.
Oh my gosh.
That's one of the most glorious things. They are so humble that they're correcting the infallible bishop.
I wanted to continue on. I had a thought when Jimbob and you guys were mentioning some of the trad cats and how this sort of, patriotism, right? When you start thinking of a general cultural movement, where is the sort of masculinity? Well, it's in patriotism, right? And the word patriot refers back to the patriarchy, right? The father of your land, right? And so traditional men, though, it's like we can't find the absence of actual God in tradition. It's like the trad cats are sort of symptomatic of the American experiment to a degree. It's like they're rooting their patriotism as their masculine identity, which is rooted within, then it's going to elevate naturally politics to the highest level because it's about like nation state governance. And it's like, well, this is about God. And so it's like I wrote down traditional men versus complaining about masculinity. How many then people in these conservative spheres are talking about men? You can talk about Andrew Tate or whatnot, but they're like, basically, you know, Andrew Tate's, oh, you know, you can't let these hoes, you know, basically what I said about the Jezebel effect. You know, you got to do it. He's describing a morally right man, but then making it permissible to have multiple women and own porn company, you know, so it's like masculinity, they can't help but then like root it within a sort of traditionally theological understanding of what a man should do. It's like that self-sacrificial, like the man who can't be defeated. Like if we fully believe in God, like that's the most motivating force. Like you're kind of uncontrollable at that point within society because you're willing to die for your belief in your tradition. Like you can't, as a man, it's like now I'm actually have power. Where when you don't have that, it's like, well, the world can continue to give you something that's going to lure you like a carrot and a donkey because you really don't have anything you'll ultimately sacrifice yourself for.
And these Catholics, right, because they are American patriots, but then America is founded on Luciferian doctrine, right. Directly rejected by Rome for centuries, right? So what do? Do you change America? Well, then are you patriotic towards it? Well, I didn't get it. They want to be in this limbo, which is a reason why we reject limbo. They want to be in this limbo of not having to answer that because we have immediate problems. Right? We have to deal with this first, then we'll figure out whether, you know, everyone was a Freemason and what sort of God endowed by their creator, right? With inalienable rights. Okay, I don't get that from the Bible. It's sort of like whenever people fail and take liberties into their own hands, they tend to cause problems and start burning babies.
Yeah. Again, back to Jezebel and Baal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jimbob, is there anything you wanted to add there? We got some super chats, guys. She's already 2.5 hours in.
Yeah, why don't you go to super chats? I'm gonna have to rescue.
Yeah, I'm sure you got kids, you got things you got to get to. First super chat comes from 2.2 Acre Indie Bear. Throws in $2 and says, "Let's get after it then." Well, thank you very much for the $2. 2.2 Acre Indie Bear. Next super chat comes from Jerry over at Exposing Powerful Lies. Throws in $5 and says, "All right, y'all, let's do this. Much love to COTEL crew, audience, guests, and hosts. This is sure to be a great stream." Well, hope you enjoyed it, Jerry. God bless you, brother, and appreciate the $5 super chat. The old and truthful Genghis Khan throws in a $9.99. Our most devout supporter. Genghis Khan's always here for us every single stream. Him and his Mongolian horde. Really appreciate you, brother. God bless. Next super chat comes from Emmanuel. Throws in 10 cents with 100 pesos and says, "I can imagine a worldview that allows serious theology discussions using devices with lots of RGB lights." By the way, 2 + 2 = 8,085. Or 80,085. Well, I did not realize that, Emmanuel, but thank you very much for your 10 cents. I greatly appreciate it. God bless you and the family. Next super chat comes from our very good friend, Keenan Beats. Throws in $4.99. Says, "Let's run these super chats up, folks. Endless value and entertainment with these three." Well, I appreciate it, Keenan. God bless you and your skills. And Keenan does your music too, right, Jimbob?
Yeah, well, he makes music and he sent me a bunch, and so I take snippets of it and put it in my StreamYard. But awesome musician.
I think it's a great way. That's what he did for me. He sent me a bunch of music, and then that's how I originally. That was like a year and a half ago, and I used his stuff. And I told him, dude, you should just keep like a section of your music free. Give it to YouTubers, like it's because we're always looking for music without words so we can use it. Yep. Then people can promote your stuff. I think it's great, and I love to see that his stuff is growing. He makes really quality music.
He does.
So shout out to Keenan Beats. God bless you, brother. Next super chat comes from 2.2 Acre Indie Bear, throws in $5 this time and says, top tier conversation, gentlemen, number one finger. Thank you very much, 2.2 Acre Indie Bear. And again, a special thank you to Jimbob and Posh for coming on. Jimbob, I know that you skipped your daily stream, so I really appreciate that.
No problem.
And how do you come up with content? I mean, I guess you have people on, which helps, because I do it 3 times a week, and I feel like I got to have like hours to prepare for my stream.
I'm just way less thorough than you. I basically kind of sit around a surface, and then when I find a crack, I just go all the way down into it. Whereas you're doing preparation from the inside out. And so we fundamentally do different, basically different presentations. Yeah. And so I think the guests help a lot. The fact that I'm sort of erratic is part of my thing.
Part of the appeal.
Yeah, you're just gonna go in all directions. Brenda shows up. Brenda doesn't show up.
Dude, your title of your streams is like Tuesday, and then
yeah, exactly.
And it's like what?
Because I don't know what I'm
gonna
like
do. 230 people, and it's like Brenda, and you're like, Brenda, come on.
I know. Oh yeah, it's different. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be going on this Sunday on Exposing Powerful Lies.
Oh, so, shout out to Jerry.
Go follow Jerry over there at Exposing Powerful Lies. I forgot what time it is, but he'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, Jerry, make sure to share that and let people know. He's a mod here, so Jerry, share the link and let people know here in the live chat. Next super chat comes from Edward. Throws in $4.99 and says, streams like these strengthen our faith. This is an awesome trio of guys. Well, thank you very much, Edward. We all greatly appreciate those kind words. Again, Keenan Beach throws in another $4.99 and says, you guys are having this conversation at a hole-in-the-wall bar. What beer are each of you ordering? Jimbob,
interesting.
Posh? What's your beer order?
I've been looking at like sours recently if I'm at like a fun little place. Okay. But again, I drink 1, maybe 2 tops, and I'm 41, so I get hungover in the same hour.
You're dehydrated before you get to
so
bed.
I'm like, I don't like drink a lot of beers.
Well, how's the old the Serb? I'm sure he's got a higher tolerance than most.
Oh yeah. But another thing, the Serb part is that you don't really care. It should be at least decent, and then maybe I get pleasantly surprised. So just not an awful one. That is about.
Give us a style. Are you a Pilsner guy, or I mean, are you stout? You like the dark beers? I mean, what? Give us something about Posh. People want to know something about you, Posh.
I said this the last time I was on Jimbob's stream. I'm like the most low maintenance person you will ever meet.
So Pabst Blue Ribbon and Bud Original.
Well, if it's not awful, I haven't had any of them. I mean, those would be expensive here, right? They would be imported.
Yeah, well, Bud Original usually is expensive.
I don't think Posh has access to enough references to even be, picky enough. We go to a bar and there's like 500 taps ready to go, right? 500 beers, and he's like,
green apple infused IPA.
He goes there and he goes, give me the one that's liquid, please.
One that hasn't gone flat, if you would. But I usually the light beers, but I like dark beers as well. I just don't particularly care.
Okay, all right. Well, if I have to answer, I'd probably say I tend to like the IPAs. I hate that they have more estrogen in them, which is the major downfall of the IPAs. They have the most estrogen out of the beer products, but I love the really hoppy flavor. So the kind of beers a lot of people don't like. I like the real hoppy, kind of bites your tongue. I like that. So I'd probably go with a nice IPA if they have it. Something, 8.6 alcohol, something like that. So next super chat comes from Vanessa Rios. Throws in $4.99 and says, what a beautiful community with purpose and meaning to be a part of. Well, God bless you, Vanessa Rios. Really appreciate those kind words, and glad that you want to describe our community like that. I think we got a pretty nice community here over at Church of the Eternal Logos. Next super chat comes from Mr. Mendoza. Throws in $3 and says, New Agers talk about God a lot. I asked this girl, what God do you speak of? She says, whatever God means to you. It's so frustrating. You know,
Yeah, it must be.
yeah, that's kind of the way it goes. But again, you have to realize they worship abstraction, so they just worship like concepts. They don't have a God. The a-ness, the the-ness doesn't exist. It's consciousness or something.
I think they believe in a God just to sort of swat away the nihilism of
Yeah, it's
atheism.
like consciousness. It's the universe, or it's just the abstraction. It's
an escape mechanism
they have
from
the category.
nihilism.
There's just nothing that fills the category. Yeah. Next super chat comes from Casey Bear 7, throws in $30. Thank you so much, Casey Bear 7. She says $10 for each of you. Seriously, my favorite guys on the YouTubes. Well, thank you so much, Casey Bear 7. I'll definitely make sure to get...
I just donated mine to David.
Same.
Well, you guys are too generous.
That's
then.
sorted.
But
thank you, Casey Bear.
Yes, thank you so much, Casey Bear. Very, very sweet to throw in $30. I really appreciate that. Next super chat comes from Mr. Mendoza again, throws in another $3 and says, playing devil's advocate, we have moral faculties like compassion, therefore we ought exercise that towards other beings.
Why is compassion moral?
Yeah. You know, and I'm not sure.
I'm not even sure that's the question.
Yeah,
I mean,
playing devil's
yes,
advocate. Is he trying to? Because this is midway through. I wonder if this is when we were talking about like energies of God and like the Orthodox Theodicy. And
it may have come up when we were kind of doing a review of paradigms in morality, and we were calling into question the standard of morality. Well, you need a standard to judge God, and we branched off of that a little bit. So it could have been
you're right.
Pretty far beyond.
Could you possibly ground it?
Yeah, so that's
morality
what I'm doing.
and
So he's playing devil's advocate. He's saying we have moral faculties like compassion. Well, again, that presupposes that compassion is moral. So you have a presupposition there. Therefore, we
not in the pagan worldview, like Romans and the Greeks weren't big on compassion.
Yeah, the Nordics weren't interested in compassion. That was kind of a weak.
Right, they thought if you were powerful, you were blessed by the gods and favored by them. If you were weak and poor and sickly, then they didn't like you, and you deserve.
Asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
but not, if you're weak, you should be hated. You're to be despised for it. You're cursed.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, Mr. Mendoza, what we're trying to highlight is even within the first, we didn't even get through the whole sentence, that you already have a Christian presupposition that compassion equals moral. At least we could say somewhat of the Abrahamic, so maybe Islam you could root in there as well. So we're just pointing out you have a presupposition there. So you say we have moral faculties like compassion, presupposes compassion is moral. Therefore, we ought exercise that towards other beings.
I would say, let me just interject quick. I would just say compassion would be an expression of a being, of a person. It would be an energy of a person. You know, that's how you would like. There's no compassionate rock or like thing, right? Or abstract. So it's always to say compassion. Yeah. So to say compassion, that would be one sort of attribute of a person. If you were to say, yeah, it's the attribute of us, we have that thing and that thing's moral. Well, both morality, being moral, and compassion, because being moral could be more than being compassionate. It could be a whole set of things, right? To be moral. And so, it doesn't tell us why compassion is good, as David said, but also right there in the term compassion, there's some entailment of beingness. It's prescriptive, and there must be a standard. If it's saying compassion is a behavior we ought to pursue, then the behavior itself is a standard that must be tied to another a being.
Yeah,
and
can how do you exert it? That's another question that's being begged here is how do you express compassion? Because I would say social justice and social justice warriors, I think they are phenomenologically experiencing an authentic trying to be compassionate towards people, the BLM movement, the people. So it's like, well, I think compassion, yes, I do believe as a Christian it's moral, but I think that it's then contained in certain ways that we express compassion, and that contemporary progressive social justice is a way in which they've taken the experience and the emotion and the fervor of compassion and wanting to help people and manipulated them into other agendas.
Also experiencing compassion. Sometimes people try to use the empathy and they try to make it synonymous with compassion. Well, if feeling compassion was a moral act, you wouldn't need to intervene or commit any actual additional acts so long as you felt compassion. So if I walk by an alley and this horrific thing is happening to someone in the alley, as long as I felt compassion, my job is done, right? And so it doesn't tell you what to do. Now you can reverse that and say, I have compassion for watching my daughter grow and go through stumbles and friends saying mean things to her. Now, me feeling compassion doesn't mean I suddenly now intervene on that process of her growth, the things that she's going to have to deal with and how she learns sacrifice and struggle and long suffering. This compassion and this tension between, maybe it's a false tension, but it's between compassion and suffering. If you have compassion, well, stop that thing from happening. Well, it's not always the right thing to do to stop the thing from happening just because you have compassion or you feel empathy because they're going through something. Those two aren't identical, but I think we've.
Well, you nailed it. Is there anything you want to say about that, Posh?
I want to say that Compassionate Rock is a good multi-layered name for a Christian rock band.
Totally. Yeah. That's very
Compassionate Peter. Oh, right.
Yeah, right, but also maybe Jesus, right?
That's true, yeah,
right?
he's the cornerstone. He's the cornerstone.
That's why I said multi-layered.
Hey. All right, next super chat comes from Eric Doc. Throws in $5 and says, Posh, can you talk a little more about how pride is the foundation that other sin is built upon? Thanks to you and JB. So he wants to hear your wisdom, Posh. Drop some wisdom on him.
Right. Well, you need pride in order to feel slighted, for example. So if you're sad, you are sad because you have pride in you that you don't deserve this. Someone else doesn't deserve this. If you are feeling wrathful, you have a problem because how dare something inconvenience me? I will rage out. This is all also participating in demonic energies, right? But any sin, greed, I deserve more than I have. Slothfulness, no one can tell me that I need to do this or that. I have a right, I should, I deserve, etc., not to work right now or whatever. All of these, if you have humility, a humble and contrite heart, God will not reject. It's because then you would be in alignment with God. Your heart, as St. Peter says, it is not me, but Christ who lives in me. That is, your heart is now fully dedicated to God, and that is where you have fullness, but you need humility for that. Right. And that is how we see even divine hierarchy. God, the ultimate being of all reality, came down, washed people's feet, died for people. He lived in poverty. He didn't, assume this giant palace or whatever. So even the act of just incarnating is infinitely humble. So that is why we are to replicate God, and pride being the essence of all sin, others are just outworkings of it. Like the two commandments of Christ being, love thy God with all thine heart, all thy strength. I can't remember it in English, sorry. And the second one being love thy neighbor as thyself. If you take those two seriously, you don't need to be told, do not murder, do not commit adultery, right? They come out of those two. And that is the same thing with pride being the source of all others. These are just outworkings.
Right. The presuppositions justify then the framework, the means, and that's where the pride. Then we believe that pride is the original sin. So who we believe to be Lucifer, the most beautiful, intelligent angel who falls, what we believe is Satan. It's because he wanted to worship himself, and so ultimately, then the spiritual warfare, the spiritual battle, is continually him getting people to fall into his image. Which his image is to worship yourself, as opposed to worshiping God, which is then us then falling back into our higher image, which the angels don't have. And this is why God is a man, not an angel. And that's part of why the spiritual warfare is then over our souls, is because the whole game's about us. And that the angels and the demons that fell are upset, they're jealous, the fact that we can repent, They made a mistake. They're eternally damned. We don't have to be, and that's why God then became a man. We are not angels. We're something higher, but often we act and exist as something much, much lower. And so that's the telos. That's the call. That's why then morality actually is the ladder that sets us free, following Christ, taking up that moral cross that we bear. That's actually then how we reorient everything. You become more of a man. You become more responsible. You take more blame. You take more ownership, because that's what the tradition calls for. And then ultimately you get married. The tradition says you will die if something happens to your children and your wife, and you're responsible for their salvation. So you have to teach them the faith. What happens to their souls is part of what's going to happen to your soul, and you have to die for them, and you have to protect them, and you have to provide for them. It's like that's the thing that men need that they're not being told.
I would like to just add that there is in the United States this prevalent idea that Satan wanted to overthrow God and become like the ultimate God of the universe. No. Satan isn't stupid. He knows he can't do that. The envy was in the fact that God would have incarnated irrespective of the fall. So he would have come, and now it would work out very differently, right? But Satan didn't want man to become higher than him. That is the envy. So he went to destroy man, and he says, God is enthroned in our hearts. And that is where he is dethroning God, or trying to dethrone God.
The love of God for the love of self, which is right. So again, it's like it's like history, and that's where it's like the fall and Adam. It's like when you look at the Bible, then Scripture as truth expressing itself allegorically. It's like you realize that the whole story is happening right at this moment, right now, both inside you, outside you, in the world, inside other people. That's the phenomenon. That's the mystery of the whole spiritual reality of this whole thing. So, anyways, continuing on. No, Jimbob gets to go. Keenan throws in $4.99, says, let's send Posh to a Southern Baptist church with a GoPro and a mic. I think that'd probably be a fun idea.
They'd throw me out for sounding British, and they'll think I'm of some ancient bloodline or whatever. I wouldn't stand a chance even to start.
That'd be interesting. I think you guys would probably connect on cigarette smoking and taking shots of vodka and various liquors. So, Southern people love to drink, and they still love to smoke their cigarettes. So you probably find a common kindred spirit there.
I could also imagine Posh holding a rattlesnake, but not for those reasons. Yeah. Just like out of the ordinary. Just
or his next cutoff is a Confederate flag. Next super chat comes from Rachel Wilson. Shout out to the Wilsons, Andrew Wilson and Rachel Wilson and the Crucible. God bless you guys and the kids. Hope everybody's doing well. She throws in $5 and says, what a great show with all three of you gentlemen together. Pretty sure my IQ went up 10 points just from watching this. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. God bless you and all the work you do. Make sure you get her book, The Occult Origins of Feminism, The Cult Roots maybe. I forget exactly, but shout out to Rachel and Andrew. God bless you guys. Next super chat comes from Keenan again, throws in another $4.99. My gosh, Keenan. Someone mentioned Matthew 124 after the perpetual virgin talk. Thoughts? Someone mentioned Matthew 124 after the perpetual virgin talks. Thoughts? I'm not sure what Matthew 124 is, so put me on the spot. I am not Jay Dyer. So I do not have the Bible memorized. According to this, Matthew 24:1. Matthew 124. I put it in wrong. Matthew 124 reads, when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary home as his wife. Sure.
I mean, that's what is said immediately. He was ordered to take so that she wouldn't be killed for practicing, extramarital relations. So he became her protector, It doesn't
Right.
mean he engaged in any coitus.
Right.
With
I
her.
think what they're trying to say is, well, he took her home, and there's a common expression in the Old Testament when somebody
Right,
says,
and
get
Barry
to know,
White
right?
started
It says
playing
the
it.
angels of the, like the men, like when it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, how they wanted to get to know the angels of the Lord. This meant that they were taken over by like their homosexual passions and everything. So,
Also, this would be at a point, that if that was what happened, then she was either pregnant with Christ or was supposed to be pregnant with Christ.
Hold on. This is dumb. I just read the Bible. Okay, the next verse totally disproves the presupposition. So it says, then Joseph, being aroused from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded him and took him as his wife, comma, end of verse, next verse, and did not know her till she had brought forth her first son, which he, according to Scripture, did not conceive of, so he did not have sex with her.
But they would say it is until she bore the first son. And this is a problem because they say, oh, therefore after that he did, which is rubbish
And then the
interpretation.
footnote here, the use of the word till does not imply that Joseph had marital relations with Mary after the Savior's birth. In the Bible, the word sometimes translated quote-unquote to is often used to express a situation that actually continues after the event mission. See, and then references Genesis 8:7, Deuteronomy 34:6, 2 Kings 6:23. The witness of the entire church throughout history is that Mary remained a virgin for life.
This is also in the prophecies when it says she is called the Eastern Gate. There's a lot to talk about gates in the Old Testament, but that Ezekiel's, I think it is Ezekiel's vision, which says, he shall come through the Eastern Gate and none shall enter after him.
Right.
That's one thing. Another thing is, it was probably in one of those verses mentioned. By the way, verses were put in by the church. Versification, I mean. So this would have all been just a block of text, right? It would have been just a block of text, right? You can't pull out a verse because verses are for liturgies. And what I want to say was, says, was it Moses buried his father-in-law's idols and says they were not found until this day? That doesn't mean they found them when he was writing that. It means they have not been found. You can use that in every day. Oh, I lost my, I don't know, car keys and I haven't found them till now.
Yeah.
You can use it. It's not the typical phraseology one would use. They would say I still haven't found them, but that it's ongoing. But this is talking about the past. So it's saying, it's trying to point out that this is not Joseph's son, not that something happened afterwards.
Next super chat comes from Paladin YYZ, $20. Thank you so much, Paladin. Says, Brenda taught me that my academic identity is determined by what I hang on my wall. When I start my own channel, I will be sure to hang a math book and an astronaut helmet next to my guitars. I don't know. Is this attack at my icons? I don't get the context. You guys fill me in here.
It's just a Brenda reference.
She say something
judging.
about. Okay.
Not yours, just in the past.
Don't get into it.
Yeah, it's not even worth
All right,
it.
moving on. Thank you very much, Paladin, for the $20 super chat. God bless you, brother. Next super chat comes from Whom Do You Serve? Throws in $10 and says, Posh, we need you to stop smoking. You are too valuable for that poison. Well, I argue he should just move to cigars myself. I think he just needs to go from cigarettes to cigars and just finish the persona. I mean, we're in the process of completion here, right?
Well, then I would have to go with a pipe.
Cigar. Huh?
I'd have to go with a pipe then.
A pipe? Okay, pipe.
Right. And go,
You
a
like
lot
pipes?
more humming.
When the next super chat comes from Ephraim, throws in $5, says, late to the show, but I appreciate you, brother, speaking truth. Well, thank you very much, Ephraim. And again, thank you very much. Whom do you serve? And then last and final super chat comes again from Keenan Beats, throws in $1.99 and says, thanks for the clarification. Well, you guys are more than welcome. Thank you so much. It was a good point to raise, Keenan. I think you're probably not the only one. I'm sure multiple people have heard that argument about Joseph sleeping with Mary. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for being here. Jimbob, thank you for being willing to postpone your daily stream and your audience to join. And again, your busy life as a father. Posh, appreciate your first appearance over here in my little icon corner in the world in Midwest America. So I really appreciate you coming on. God bless to you both. Have a great, great weekend. Is there anything you'd like to say and maybe share with how people can find your stuff? I'll leave Jimbob. I mean, everybody here already knows Jimbob, and I'll leave Jimbob's link in the video description. But share with whatever you guys want to say.
Yeah, that's it. You know where to find me over at YouTube. You could buy, for those of you who didn't get Savage Memes Volume 4, you can go grab that. Also, I'm doing a bunch of doodles of people. So people are really enjoying that. So if you want an avatar of you drawn in the Jimbob style, which is to say crude, poorly colored, always shaded from the same direction of light, go ahead and grab one of those at my website.
Absolutely.
All right, so people can. My channel is the Posh Redneck. My Instagram is
well,
the
good that you
underscore
clarify
Posh.
that. I know there's a lot of posh rednecks out there running around.
You'd be surprised, maybe. But my Instagram is the underscore Posh underscore Redneck, and as soon as I work out the technical problems, I will be posting a lot of stuff because I have a tendency to just drone on and on. And one thing, the Crucible was mentioned. Jimbob, I think you have the debate next.
Oh, Jimbob, you got a new debate coming up?
Yeah, I got a debate on Thursday against this guy, Nathan, who's like a, I don't know, up-and-comer philosophy nerd guy.
What are you guys debating?
Naturalism.
Oh, nice.
You know, physicalism, naturalism.
I'll definitely clue in. I was talking with Andrew. We may do something with Styx Hexenhammer in October on naturalism. So I was like, I'm definitely interested in that. But
awesome.
Yeah, I'll definitely be tuning in. That would be next Thursday. So I'll be on my way to Florida, to St. Augustine. So I'll probably be watching while I'm driving. Well, guys, thank you very, very much. Again, God bless you all. God bless your families, and enjoy your weekend. And then, again, thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the super chatters. Enjoy your weekend as well. God bless you all, and I will be back either Sunday or Monday. So, as always, until next time.